important. My distinguished guests, academics in the room, civil society leaders, our media colleagues and friends, and then of course my colleagues from Aneej, and then we'd like to welcome you all to this important meeting. Thank you all for coming. It gives me a great honor and pleasure to welcome you all to this National Debt Conference, put together by the African Network for Environment and Economic Justice, Aneej, in collaboration with the African Forum and Network on Debt and Development, Afrodad, our long-standing partner on the debt issue. I recall several decades ago when Afrodad started as a fledgling organization in Harare. Our executive director, the Reverend David Golo, was on the board of Afrodad. At that time, Opa Kapanji Panga, the founder of Afrodad, was the executive director. So we are happy to continue working with Afrodad on this issue. The Nigeria National Debt Conference aligns strategically with the African Union's theme for 2025, which is justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations in its efforts to seek redress for historical injustices rooted in colonial and post-colonial injustices, slavery, illicit financial flows, and climate injustice. This conference will feed into this year's AFCOD 5, which will be held in Accra, Ghana. AFCOD is a pet project of Afrodad, and of course, working in partnership with colleagues from across Africa. Between the 27th and 29th of August this year, under the theme Reparations and Reparative Justice for an African Financial Architecture and Transformation. It is important at this juncture to contextualize Nigeria's debt crisis. Today, Nigeria and indeed Africa are at a crossroads, and as part of the global community, we are faced with the poly-crisis of climate emergency, COVID-19. When I say COVID-19, we're talking about the impact. It's still lingering. Ukraine war, the Middle East war, artificial intelligence, irregular migration, and the crippling debt crisis as few examples of the poly-crisis. These crises have hit African countries the most, living in its toll, widespread poverty, underdevelopment, insecurity, and conflicts, as well as unemployment, among several others. With just 5 years to the end of the UN declared Sustainable Development Goals, one can safely conclude that Africa is being left behind, contrary to the slogan of "Leave no one behind." Our keynote speaker for today will zoom into these issues, but I'm just trying to lay the foundation for the details to come. According to the Debt Management Office, the DMO, Nigeria's total public debt as at March 31st this year stood at $97.2 billion US. Or if you want us to translate it to our own national currency, we should be talking about the figure 149.3 trillion naira. Experts have raised the alarm that Nigeria's debt might become unsustainable given that the country is close to the 40% threshold of debt to GDP ratio. Past and present governments have continued to rely on borrowing from IMF and the World Bank, and of course from private sources and the commercial sources, to finance some of its projects without taking into cognizance the impact on the economy. In the 2025 budget of 54.9 trillion naira, 14.3 trillion naira, or 26% of the budget, is earmarked for debt servicing. And this is exceeding the combined budget of health, education, agriculture, and social welfare. Sadly, the utilization and management of these loan facilities leaves much to be desired due to inherent corruption in the nation's public system. Nigeria and other African countries continue to lose significant amounts of their resources to illicit financial flows. It is estimated that Nigeria loses about $18 billion annually to illicit financial flows. According to the recent United Nations Commission for Africa, UNECA report, Africa is losing $90 billion annually to illicit financial flows. And of course, around another 140 billion dollars to corruption. When we say corruption, we're talking about both the grand corruption and the petty corruption. And most of these funds are stashed in safe havens, mostly in Western countries. Much more, the neoliberal policies of International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and World Bank adversely affected African economies. These neoliberal policies are imposed on countries with conditionalities that exacerbate poverty, unemployment, and social unrest, as witnessed in Nigeria and in several other countries. The adoption of the Structural Adjustment Program, SAP, in the 80s by the Nigerian government on the advice of the IMF and World Bank as a condition for accessing IMF loans had negative consequences for their nation. These conditionalities, which include, of course, the devaluation of Naira, austerity measures, privatization, and economic liberalization, resulted in unemployment, inflation, poverty, as well as the crippling debts that we experienced. And of course, dependency. Given the harm done to African countries by the IMF and World Bank policies, the call for reparations and reparative justice is therefore seen as a national imperative and indeed an African imperative. Rising poverty levels in Nigeria poses an existential threat to the survival of the country. In a recent report by the World Bank itself, the poverty rate of rural dwellers in Nigeria has jumped to 75%, while that of urban dwellers was put at 41.3%. The World Bank revealed this in its April 2025 Poverty and Equity Brief for Nigerians. This unprecedented poverty increase was due to economic hardship and inequality among rural dwellers. Nigerians are today facing severe cost of living crisis due to the policy reforms of the present government, which was meant to stabilize the microeconomic environment, but has sadly exacerbated poverty, unemployment, and inflation. The bank also projects that poverty in Nigeria would rise by 3.6% around 2027 due to persistent economic headwinds buffeting Nigeria. In 2018, Nigeria became the poverty capital of the world, with 86.7 million people living below the poverty line of $2.15 per day, while in 2022, the National Bureau of Statistics reported that 133 million Nigerians were multidimensionally poor. Today, the per capita of Nigeria has fallen to some $824 per capita, far, far below the figure in 1960 when Nigeria gained independence. Insecurity has continued to wreak havoc on some parts of the country, and in fact widespread, as farmers can no longer access their farms to cultivate or harvest their produce. Kidnapping for ransom is commonplace in Nigeria, with huge sums of money being paid out for ransom. Major food belts in the country have been infested by bandits and terrorists who have occupied these farming communities, thereby making the country food insecure. Several billions of naira are budgeted yearly for arms and ammunition, but there are reports that most of the funds are diverted by corrupt officials in the military and the police. From 30th June to 3rd of July this year, heads of governments, heads of states and governments and high representatives, including civil society organizations, gathered in Sevilla, Spain, to renew the global financing for development framework, building on the 2015 Addis Ababa Action Agenda. Civil society expectations and hope for a UN debt convention that will provide a more democratic space to address issues of debt was dashed as the final outcome document failed to retain the zero draft provision for the debt convention. What also appeared a glimmer of hope in that document was that we had a provision, and I quote, "We request the United Nations Secretary General to convene a working group tasked to propose a consolidated set of voluntary guiding principles on responsible sovereign borrowing and lending and proposals for their implementation." For us who were there, we felt that this was muzzled in the same document, as it further stated that the working group which it proposed will include the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, and that they will work in consultation with member states and other relevant stakeholders. It is akin to a child being afflicted by a witch doctor, and then the parents go to the oraculist for solution, and the oraculist will redirect them back to the witch doctor for solution. And so for us, we believe that that was a failed hope for those of us, civil society, who actually angled for a debt convention. We are to spend today together, comrades, to critically examine Nigeria's debt crisis in the lens of reparative justice and identify policy frameworks for advancing debt relief rooted in historical redress and equity. You all experts in the room know better than I do, and our expectations as organizers are very high. We also intend to galvanize multi-stakeholder advocacy entry points at national and international levels for debt cancellation, fair debt practices, and reparation for historical and systemic injustices that have undermined Nigeria's growth and development. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have invited you, our stakeholders, from various backgrounds to interrogate, analyze, and proffer actionable recommendations on the injustices suffered by Nigeria as a result of colonialism, neoliberalism, climate injustice, as well as illicit financial flows. I trust that you all in the room will do justice to this topic and will come up with actionable plans for both the government and civil society post-Sevilla. I thank you all for your kind attention.
This is a very timely meeting, Observing all protocols that have been mentioned, I would want to thank Aneej, our national partner, that has been very instrumental towards realizing the agenda that we have for making Africa a rule maker, as you have seen there on the banner. And as Comrade Leo has mentioned very well, that the debt crisis cannot be ignored. And indeed, coming from the Financing for Development process, the member states were very clear that the debt crisis is a human crisis. And as we have heard, even here in Nigeria, we are seeing the government depending more on debt, which causes a fiscal, a strain in the fiscal space, which now leads to the people carrying the burden of the debt. And we have seen that in most of us not being able to access public services like healthcare, education, because the governments of Nigeria and even other African governments are being forced to service their debt obligations over social service spending. So it's very prudent at this moment in time that African governments actually start to think about how they can be able to move away from depending on debt. And also very important, as Comrade Leo has mentioned, is the aspect of debt cancellation, which we will discuss in this meeting, but also more importantly, the reforming of the debt architecture. And it's important because the rules have been made for Africa for a very long time. We do know that the prominent institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, are the ones that have been creating the rules for Africa. They've been creating conditionalities that do not work for our African countries. These conditionalities actually keep our countries dependent, and they actually put us at the bottom of the value chain. We are unable to trade, we are unable to participate in the market because of very high interest rates that do not apply to developed countries. So therefore, because of these rules and conditionalities, Africa has remained at the bottom. And that is why, even through this meeting, we are calling for the reform of the debt architecture, the reform of the financial architecture that has worked to disfavor African countries for a very long time. So we are looking forward to the discussions, and once again, we are very grateful for the work that Aneej has been doing at the national level, and also the work that the ministry, I'm sure, is doing to ensure that Nigeria actually gets out of debt and is able to serve its obligations to the people. There's nothing as bad as being a slave to indebtedness. So it's time for Africa to actually get out of that form of slavery and to become the global giant that it is. Thank you very much.
Undergraduate at ABU then, I used to read one particular book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, by Walter Rodney. I continuously reading this book, honestly, to arouse my national consciousness. And we keep repeating the same story every time, even years after our independence. Meaning that we just have to sit down and re-strategize. Distinguished participants, I want to start with the fact that Nigeria, like many African nations, is confronting a public debt burden that poses profound implications for our economy, our development trajectory, and indeed our national sovereignty. Nigerian public debt has grown significantly over the last decade. As of today, our debt to GDP ratio remains within moderate threshold. But this figure alone masks the weight of rising debt servicing costs, foreign exchange pressures, and constrained fiscal space. In recent years, our debt service to revenue ratio has at times exceeded 90%, which is quite unfortunate, severely limiting our ability to invest in infrastructure, education, healthcare, and climate resilience, all essential to lifting millions of Nigerians out of poverty. In addition, we must however recognize the legacy of colonial exploitation, structural adjustments programs, and unfair global trade and financial systems that have shaped the vulnerability of our economy. These historical injustices have created a cycle of dependence and underdevelopment, from which we must now break free. Debt must remain a tool for development, not a trap that perpetuates underdevelopment. The current government, the current administration has changed this narrative as borrowing are tied to development projects that are designed to pay back for sustainability. The time has come for a new paradigm, one that sees debt relief not as charity, but as a matter of justice. We are therefore calling for the repatriation of stolen assets and funds as part of a broader reparative agenda. A re-examination of the legitimacy of certain debts accrued under unjust conditions. More importantly, a restructuring of debt framework that accounts for the historical and structural disadvantage that we continue to face. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, reparative justice can take many forms, from full or partial debt cancellation, to concessional refinancing, to debt for development swaps, where debt is redirected into national priorities like education, healthcare, or climate action. Let me assure this gathering that the government of Nigeria remains steadfast in its commitment to responsible borrowing, transparency, and fiscal reform. We are strengthening our debt management framework through the medium-term expenditure framework, the strategic revenue growth initiatives, and the debt sustainability plan. The country is also investing in domestic revenue mobilization, digitization of tax system, curbing wasteful spending, as well as ensuring efficiency. However, as we clean our house, we must confront the global architecture that allows wealth to flow out faster than it comes in. This conference offers a unique opportunity not only to discuss and debate, but to build consensus for collective advocacy. We must unite in calling for a United Nations-led sovereign debt workout mechanism, greater accountability from financial centers and global institutions, and a bold African voice that demands fairness in the global economic order. Let us shift the narrative from one of helpless indebtedness to one of economic sovereignty, justice, and self-determined development. Debt relief through reparation and reparative justice is not just a financial policy, it is a moral imperative. Together, let us advance this cause with courage, clarity, and conviction. Thank you.
To discuss the way forward. And I think sitting here next to my brother, it's overwhelming for me because in 2007, we were together at a training on debt audit in Nairobi, Kenya. And we were sitting, we were the only Nigerians that were at that meeting. That was my first time of meeting him. I didn't meet him in Nigeria, but I met him there. And we became brother and sister instantly. You know the likes when you meet Nigerians outside the country. It's like the same mother gave birth to you. It's only when you come in here, then you wonder what is happening. You will travel for almost 1,000 kilometers to go and meet the other brother in the same country. And then the happiness and the joy. And I hope, we can carry that on. So I met him. In that meeting of Jubilee Debt, at that time, Nigeria was talking about debt forgiveness. Or, what we don't owe, we don't pay. And then we were giving the fact sheet on Nigeria. It's still stamping in my head. For Nigerians to be given a fact sheet by others, it wasn't us. We didn't discover that in Nigeria. But we were given the fact sheet on the debt that Nigerian owed. If some of you will remember, some of you who know about sustainable development goals, those the time we rolled drums when we were forgiving some debts. If some of you will remember, we were forgiving nothing. In 1978, Nigeria borrowed $7 billion. In 2001, and it was borrowed under the Obasanjo military regime. In 2001, Nigeria had paid back 16 billion for that debt. And we had a balance of 31 billion. And $31 billion for the just get me right so I don't confuse you. You borrowed 4 billion. And so in 2001, we were owing 31 billion. In 2006, by the same Obasanjo administration, at that time, Nigeria was leading the Africans. Africans, I'm talking about debt forgiveness, and it was a big movement. The Nigerian government was cornered into a meeting, into one meeting, and they said, what you need to do is pay 16 billion and we will forgive you the rest. And this is what Nigeria did. So Nigeria left the African countries in the limbo. The leadership left the African countries, and then they went and paid, they paid 12 billion back and bought bonds for 4 billion. And at that point, we were now owing $18 billion. And then they said, we forgive you the 18 billion, but you have to put it back in your development activities and we have to monitor. At that time, IMF and the World Bank, they were not in Nigeria. But they planted before we knew. In order to spend that $18 billion, Nigerian civil service was, they were enshrined into it to control how you spend that money. And that is further controlling what you spend the money for and all of that. When you put, so at the end of the day, you have paid 16 billion and 16 billion. What's that? That's 32. Plus 18 billion, what have you paid? 50. For 4 billion that you pay. I just want to show you that because as a Nigerian, for me and my brother, if we don't say that at this meeting, for you to also hear. And so they said, we have been forgiven. The current government, there was a time, I was in public health for about 10 years. And I was on holiday when I was under USAID project at the time. And I was called from a holiday because they said the World Bank was giving us $100 million for malaria because Global Fund wasn't funding a number of, so for 7 states. And happily, because of the fight against malaria and all of that, I was recalled from my leave. And we went and we had a design for 1 week. And so we designed something for 100 million for the 7 states. And then, so we went to do a presentation before the Director of Public Health at the Ministry of, at the Federal Ministry of Health under, Professor Lambo, at the time. And then, so we were at this meeting with the Director of Public Health. I think it was Dr. Abebe then. And then one guy from the ministry asked a question. Is this money loan or is it a grant? And I saw the leader of the World Bank shifting on her seat. Myself and the WHO guy, were just looking at her. She was shifting. I'm like, what? It's a loan, but it can be made a grant. We don't know, we are still discussing and all of that. When they deflate balloons, because I couldn't believe that the structural adjustment program that I fought and the loan taking that I fought and some of our colleagues died in school was still here, that I was discussing loan. I was so deflated. That we didn't stop there. 2 days later, we were making a presentation before the, no, at that moment, they asked the question again, how much is this loan? They say it's $180 million. And I'm like, but we planned for 100 million. What happened? Then we were now presenting to, the minister himself 2 days later. And, they said, and another person from, Nigerian civil service, we have very intelligent people. They asked the question again, how much is this loan? And we're told that it was 280 million. So this is the way it operates, which means the 180 million is used to service your debt of 100 million. But you are paying. This is one of the things. And I'll take it back to recent times. The Nigerian government was going to, the Ministry of Women Affairs was going to be giving $500 million for women's issues. And one of the things that the then minister was bringing out is they want to give this loan, 500 million, but they want 200 million back, for management. And she was like, this is not it. Why would you want to give 500 and then you hold back 40% and say this is the servicing? I'm just trying to bring us back to say that the enslavement of the Nigerian people, we looked at the structural adjustment program, we fought it. Nigerian economies fought it, but it is never enough. Nigerian leaders are not listening to Nigerians. IMF and the World Bank, they came with these conditionalities. The first thing they started was devaluation of the Naira. And the devaluation, whatever has been done, from the moment we introduced these issues, many, factories started closing down. And they are still closing down. The other day I went to ask for, is it Ariel? As a woman, you look for washing liquids and all of that. They say the company has gone. This one, you ask them, so how many new industries have come to Nigeria? The textile industries, we had 125 or more industries. Now it's about 30. What happened to and we have a huge unemployment. Nigeria has a workforce that can go into even 300 textile working environment. We don't have it anymore. Now we have a government that also came on board to punish Nigerians by removing subsidy. If you remove the subsidy and you use it for Nigerians, and you say, because the so-called subsidy, I don't believe in it anyway. My first place of work was Nigeria Labour Congress. So I knew when the first strike for subsidy removal started, from 11 naira to 22 naira. I remember that. The 4 refineries are not working. For government itself, for those refineries to have closed down, how many people in the workforce do you think you have condemned? We have young Nigerians. Population is a blessing, not a curse. We have able-bodied young men and women that are ready to work. You remember when, was it in the early 2000, during Obama's regime, he rolled in money, billions of dollars, to stop industries from closing down. So they can keep people at work and they are paying tax to the government. So what have we done? I still remember, it's fresh in my mind because of the struggle from the universities in those days, because many of us went to detention, we were locked up. Some of us who were not killed were locked up and all of that. At the end of the day, in 1996, I remember the corner of the newspaper where IMF apologized to Nigerians, to Africans, that they are sorry that the policies that they proposed failed. And I am like, it failed. So what are you going to do about it? After you used it to destroy every facet of our social lives. And so it failed. We were in school, some of us had scholarship, the younger Nigerians. And we have a population right now, because I bring it down to Nigeria, a huge population in school. Between 200 and 300 level, a lot of people are dropping. Between 300 and 400 level, a lot of people are dropping. Many doctors are dropping from their courses because they have no scholarship, they have nothing to do. Many students, even when you step back a bit, you will see our social environment. You see students, many of them cannot pay for their GSS exams. Many cannot pay for the SSC exams, for WAEC and NECO. A cluster of Nigerians are left behind. And I still tell people, it looked like a joke. There are so many young Nigerians that are now 40 years old and they can't get married, both male and female, because they have no jobs. And so what has privatization, the collapse of the socialist structure, also we are looking at governance of irresponsibility a lot. But I always say that wherever you have people, you still have some decent people. In the police force, you have some very decent people and you have some corrupt people. In the army, you have some. In the civil service, you have that. And I'm happy that we are collaborating with the Ministry, of Budgets and Planning. We have always done that. Even in monitoring budgets, they expose, the ministry to us, the budget envelope and all of that. This particular administration, in 1 year, borrowed more than Buhari borrowed in his 8 years. And then you say subsidy. And then you are looking at an environment where the cheapest food is gari and ekpa. Gari and the granite that you can take to whole tummy. Nigerians cannot afford gari. Gari has become an essential commodity. And the life of Nigerians, like my friend has mentioned, my brother. And so, in it together, we need to recommit ourselves. We need to hold government accountable. That's what we do best. To remind them. So we need a bigger conference where we can continue to sensitize Nigerians. Because when we came back with that fact sheet, even my then boss, which was Dr. Tibe Buzu, said, what? You mean this is, and we don't know about it? How did we popularize it? And what are we doing now? So if you have a debt of 70-something billion, in no time, it's going to be about 200 billion. How Europe underdeveloped Africa, you can see it now that we are the ones functioning. Another one I just came back from a commission of inquiry on IMF and the World Bank, African People's Commission of Inquiry in Malawi. One card also that was shown in that 2007, meeting was a card on Malawi. Malawi borrowed $5 million. $5 million to build a bridge that never existed. Because another thing is this irresponsibility of the borrowing, what does it come into and what? And so they borrowed $5 million and then they sold that debt to a private entity for $15 million. And then the Malawian government was being sued for $55 million. Small Malawi, a country of very, a lot of people are finding it's an existential question. And you have to impoverish them. So what we are, further enslavement within the African space is what we are finding, and it's deliberate. If $18 billion is going out of Nigeria every year, you see the volume of the richness and all of that, and we're not building industries. Our president, leadership, we call for leadership reformation, for character reformation, because in a country that is so poor, people are dying. We're coming, and then we have crises all over as well. People are dying, and our president can go ahead and buy a plane for 150 billion. And you can buy, how do you sit around? I think they are cut off from the real people. Because hunger is killing people. Raw hunger is killing people if you don't know. All of you that are seated here, you may be earning some money, but at the end of the month, you are completely empty. Because people will send you their account numbers. Some people will tell you, please send me 2,000 naira. And this is real. And so our children, investment in the human capital, there is no money to invest. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here. I'm happy that Afrodad is here. I'm happy that we are all here to discuss our country. We have no other country. This is our country. We need to fight for it. Fight with everything that you have. Of course, be diplomatic. Let's engage in critical, constructive, fact-based, evidence-based analysis and bring it up to the government. Nelson Mandela said, the heart that can hate with so much intensity, when turned around, can also love with the same intensity. The love for country must come out. Patriotism must come out. Not when you are telling me we want to hand over a nation without stain to our younger ones. That's a deceit. We must do that in our lives. The loss of lives we are losing every day is due to the kind of governance. Governance is about the economy, the welfare, and security. What of it we're talking? We have untold hardship that is all over the place. And then you see people coming to drive you from your land, and they occupy, and the security says nothing. They drive you to IDP camps. And as a woman, we had a recent issue in Benue. When I look at 200 people being killed, I cry, because that is 200 pregnancies. Pregnant women. Close your eyes and look at 200 pregnant women. The blood that is flowing in the land is the blood of women. And that's why we must reassure ourselves, come down and ask that there must be women representation, because he who wears the shoes knows where it pinches. Women bear the burden of poverty. All of the privatization and everything they have done, they pocketed the money, and today we are still here. Thank you.
Good morning, all ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
Sometimes after listening to Leo Atako and Madam, I begin to wonder where some of us are going to start from. The issues around debt are very controversial, deep-seated, and they have historical roots. Due to the over 400 years of slavery and another over 200 years of colonialism that ravaged most part of Africa, unfair trade practices and the global south and north divide, the Africa's debt conundrum, Nigeria inclusive, has grown increasingly and lingered for as many decades as possible. Nigeria has been a net borrower, and this has affected its creditworthiness with implication on balance of trade, strength of its currency, its foreign reserve, cost of goods and services, and of course, exchange rates architecture. It is on the strength of this that activists and advocates from across the globe have consistently called for reparations to affected countries due to the impact of debt servicing on their economies. The reparation process can be in form of outright debt cancellation, debt rescheduling, low tariffs on export from affected countries, then increased aid consideration for affected countries, direct investment in social services by the big brother, quote and unquote. Then, of course, the last but not the least is intentional positive migration policies that in turn support diaspora remittances. However, these windows aimed at ameliorating the impact of slavery and colonialism in Africa have not been deep and impactful enough, calling for deeper engagement around the issue of debt justice. The question of debt justice stands on a tripod. One, is there a justification for the debt in the first instance? Is there proper debt utilization? And on a final note, is there a fair global debt service structure? And of course, the debt architecture itself. On debt justification, research by Policy House, which I heard, shows very clearly that 75% of Nigeria's debt are not justifiable and not tailored to address the needs of the populace. And that brings me to what Madam said earlier on about debt utilization inefficiency. While our debt profile is growing, the level of poverty is rising as well. In other words, there's no relationship between our borrowing and addressing the developmental needs of our people. So there are issues around the debt infrastructure. Our infrastructure gap continues to widen. You cannot drive from Benin to Abuja without, passing through so many debt traps. So you begin to wonder, what have we been using our debt to fund? Social inequality continues to be obvious. On a final note, on debt cancellation and rescheduling campaign, there should be more effort at strengthening transparency around public finance expenditure and its management. Focus should be more on changing the internal expenditure management rather than on the debt cancellation campaign. A senator has so many vehicles in his convoy. A president is moving and the entire Lagos is shut down. The Senate president moves with thousands of vehicles. The majority leader of the House of Reps, majority leader of the Senate, they are all living large. And yet, we are calling on our creditors to forgive us our debt. They are here in Abuja. The World Bank, they are here. And they see how we live our lives. So I begin to wonder, what type of moral justification do we have to be calling for debt cancellation? So it's about us looking inward and say, okay, this $1 that we have borrowed, how do we use it to address the need of our people, and not on how to empower or further enrich a politician. So how much do we invest in social services such as health, education, and security while formalizing the economy to encourage a more viable physical space? Number 3, the role of the legislation. The National Assembly of Nigeria should utilize the appropriation process to address more fundamental issues such as power and roles rather than on palliative measures such as purchasing of keke napep and trading of traditional rulers. I mean, it's very demoralizing seeing a whole national budget containing billions of naira to train traditional rulers, and traditional rulers are not under the exclusive list of the the Nigerian Constitution 1999 as amended. Traditional rulers are entitled to 5% of allocation to local government. So why should the National Assembly, which is the Federal Republic of Nigeria, have any role to play in their lives? Training them to do what? So the issues are very multifaceted. This will reduce waste. And on the final word on debt reparation, the only reparation window recommended to Nigeria is effective, efficient, transparent, and prudent management of Nigerians' resources. This offers 2 opportunities. 1, it increases our capacity to service our existing maturing debt obligation. And finally, effective utilization of available resources such as revenue from natural resources, taxation, and debt. Thank you very much, and God bless you for listening.
About this time, 2005, I was much precisely. Afrodad and Aneej had this kind of workshop here in Abuja. I remember I delivered a paper in that meeting. That's 20 years ago. In that paper, I was very definitive. I took a position. I said, look, the answer to Africa's debt or Nigeria's debt is repudiation. And I made my argument for repudiation. Of course, what I said was not novel because civil society at that time had been canvassing for repudiation of our debt across Africa. And I remember that same 2005, was when the negotiation started. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who put together what we call today the DMO, Debt Management Office. And she had no initial and started doing negotiation with the Paris Club members. And the federal government was all upbeat on it, they were happy. And was it June that same year, the Paris Club announced this so-called debt relief. And if you could remember, anyway, in Nigeria then, the government of President Olusegun Obasanjo rolled out the drums and was celebrating that they have gotten debt relief. In short, there was what we call battle of ideas between the Nigerian social movement and the government. And I can remember people like Odia Ofemo. You remember, you all know Odia Ofemo? Odia Ofemo, Chinwezu. You remember Chinwezu? Chinwezu, all those comrades and elderly comrades like Escotoyo, many others. Festus Iyayi of Blessed Memory, and all took a position and said, look, we should repudiate our debt. But those in authority said that it was not possible. They canvassed all sorts of arguments that there's no way you can repudiate the debt. That this one is the better deal. I remember this young man in this day, Segun Adeni, if I can remember. I don't know why I say that for this day. Adeni, yeah, I remember. Yeah, this day. Segun wrote a piece, and using radical political economy theory to, unmask the so-called deal of Paris Club deal. And Madame Ngozi replied, Segun, and said, those are dead ideologies, dead theory, that he should know that he should be happy that she has been able to negotiate this for us. And that then opened a flurry of attacks and counter-attacks. But at the end of the day, they had power. We were just on the other side, civil society. We had no power, apart from canvassing, apart from this kind of thing we are doing now, meeting and sending ideas across. In short, the government people argue that we should point to an example where there have been a debt repudiation. And I remember our communists came out with long list, Cuba, Argentina, Even America in the 19th century repudiated their debt. Another part of Europe. That debt repudiation was really not a new phenomenon. That debate was on. But the government went ahead to do what they decided to do. Now, the impression created was that, after this relief is given, we will be free. We will be free. We will not have any debt again. Obasanjo, of course, also taking instruction from the IMF, World Bank, the so-called international financial institutions, said yes. It also means that now we can manage our debt. It's not going to be an all-commerce affair anymore. Because don't forget that states too were borrowing. States that is what we call subnationals, and then federal government. And they say with this new deal that we have, our table is clean, everything is okay. And then that the DMO has worked out policies with which anybody can borrow. At least they actually went to the National Assembly, got all kinds of law and acts that say the DMO will scrutinize, the DMO will follow to the latter, that you don't just borrow and then you do nothing with it. That this time around you borrow and use it for development. But we can say this, that in the last 20 or so years that the DMO came on board, the DMO has done something which hitherto was not there. And we should credit them for that. Before 2005, before Ngozi put up about 2001, 2002, that when she organized that DMO, do you know that Nigeria government could not place their finger on the actual amount we are owing? It was that bad. That we are owing, we don't know how much we are owing. We don't know who we are owing. It was so chaotic. But the DMO, under Ngozi's watch, did a lot of what I call movement, discussion with our debtors, of course with our World Bank connection, and we were able to package and say this is what we are owing. The figures that we had presented contradicted the figures that the IMF and World Bank brought. But the government decided to stick with the IMF World Bank figures. The point was, you ask yourself, was it sheer ignorance that our men and women manage our economy could not put their finger on what we are owing? Even when there have been a long trajectory of borrowing, way back before independence in 1958. So this problem was there. But the DMO was able to put the DMO was able to put together and establish the figure. Although even that figure that the DMO established, I remember that Obasanjo said somewhere, and it's documented, that we have paid all this money. We have paid it over and over again, and all that stuff. But yet, the same money, the Paris Club insisted that we must pay. The government agreed. Of course, you remember too that way back in 1986, 85-86, when Ibrahim Babangida came up with the structural adjustment program. That at that time, Nigeria ran into murky waters financially. The big brother that we used to be before was no longer possible. We were owing. And of course, Babangida had contacted IMF and World Bank. And the same Babangida threw the debate to Nigerians that we should discuss, do we want loan or not. I remember the team put together came out with a verdict of no, Nigerians don't want loan. But the government went ahead and started picking up. And then roll out all the regulations and policies prescribed by the IMF for the government to implement. And that is what the specialties, and that's what we call the adjustment state. The adjustment state set in Nigeria. And guess what? To cut a long story short, they systematically push the burden to the Nigerian people. And that's why you hear subsidy withdrawal from fuel, from electricity, even the university, education, everything was. Because that is how neoliberalism works. That is how the so-called free market economy works. And You know, we were operating what we call a developmental state before then. Starting for independence. Developmental state is where the state actually take the lead in bringing about social development, infrastructure, even education. Of course, most of Africa had that kind of arrangement because we thought that is the way to build an economy. But the IMF and World Bank told the Babangida and Koda, look, that will not work. Push the money to the people, let them pay for virtually everything. And that the state should all be there to regulate and all that stuff. And of course, government listened and systematically started withdrawing subsidies from all aspects of our life. Now, after our passenger got the relief, maybe we were ignorant, maybe the government was ignorant, or maybe the ideological orientation of those in power is critical here. Those in power then, until today, have embraced neoliberalism. They've embraced capitalism. Some people call it state capitalism and all that stuff, but I call it Agberu capitalism. I hope you all know Agberu in Nigeria. The Agberu can engage anybody lawlessly, he doesn't give a damn. And that is what is happening. Because if we're even doing capitalism recognize big industries. When our economy started to leave, good of them left the country. Michelin and Co. who can mention them, they left the country. All other companies had all left. Our naira had been devalued. So they were told that that's the only way to go. Now, the government started all those policies by pushing back the burden of their social costs to the people. Now, and then started their so-called capitalism or free market economy. Till today, their supporters and their agents will argue that state infrastructure does not work. State or state-owned company or industries does not work. And that the answer is a privatization. And so they sold or whatever was still working to themselves, members of the Nigerian ruling class. They bought it. And some of the companies they bought, they balkanized them. Just go there, steal whatever is left, and left the company like that. So these are the issues that I want to talk about. Maybe for the purpose of people who are not familiar with our debt, I have a long history here, which I will just try to summarize it so that I don't take too much of time, how this debt business started. The Guardian newspaper, we all know the Guardian, influential newspaper in this country. In 2016, after we have settled the so-called Paris Club and London Club debts, did an editorial commentary. When our debt was building up again, the Guardian titled that commentary, Nigeria, a debtor by choice. Nigeria, a debtor by choice. And the Guardian argument in that editorial was that, just about a few years, 5-6 years, we thought we have left the loophole of debt. We are back on it again. And then the Guardian is opportunity to actually analyze government policies and all that stuff that is not working. Now, that editorial was written, it was read, again, Catholic Nigerians, whatever the Guardian suggested there, the government did not listen. Today, it's been rightly mentioned, the stock, the debt stock that we have, 149 point whatever trillion naira in figure. In naira figure. In a dollar, $120 billion in the public debt in terms of bringing the external debt and the domestic debt together. So we keep on borrowing. Somebody said Buhari borrowed more than all the governments, even before independence. And Madam, I say here now that the Tinubu borrowing is more than that. But let's look at it. Why are they borrowing? What is the argument? After the so-called Paris Club debt, they had this thing we call a policy support instrument, the PSI, that IMF imposed. And that this PSI is like a regulation guide. And like Shirali said, they now have offices in Aso Rock, IMF, World Bank, and some other smart bankers from Europe and America. They call themselves smart guys. You remember this guy, Pickens, John Pickens, when he wrote The Economic Hitman, he was able to reveal some of these smart young men who are at university that commercial banks gave them strength, gave them money, and said, go to Africa, go to Asia, go to South America, and convince the leaders there to come and take a loan. And I think John Pickens also revealed in that book that Where we fail to persuade them, they're the jackass movement. The jackass are the CIA agent. Some leaders in Africa, in Asia, and South America were killed because they were stubborn and resistant to taking those jets. In short, John Perkins was so clear because he was an activist. He was one of the young bankers that came to Nigeria to talk to our leaders. In short, that 1978 money you are talking about, Obasanjo too. John Perkins and others were the ones who convinced Obasanjo. Nigeria had no need for any loan at that time. We were buoyant and our economy was doing well. But Obasanjo took it and said, we're going to invest in the local, what do you call it now? The steel mill, Jakuta and people, Oshogbo and the rest. Ladies and gentlemen, where is Ajakuta steel mill today? Where is Ajakuta steel mill today? Where is Alaja today? So, I don't want to bore you. You can read it on your own because there's so much here. They took all these loans and then they couldn't utilize it. Now they were taking loan from the capital market, the Russian capital market, ICN, which strictly operates on a market basis. That one is not about I know your papa or you know my mama. No. If you have taken it and the red lines are written, the rules are written, and you sign, then you must follow through so that you pay back your debt. And government took those money. There's a long list. I refer you to TEL magazine of 18 July 2005. This lady, I don't know where she is now, EB Cemetery, remember her? She anchored that story and brought long list of projects that Nigeria took loan to implement. Some of them were abandoned halfway. Some were even very useless. They had no impact on the economy. Some were completely not started. It's at the place you can refer to that Guardian. TEL magazine, July 18, 2005. And they came up with a long list of projects across the country that Nigeria took loan for and abandoned them. In short, General Abacha, no matter what we say about him, if you remember, Abacha didn't take any loan. Abacha did something again, as if to give us evidence that our money, our loans have been mismanaged. He said to a special panel to look at all the so-called loans and the industries that were supposed to, and Abacha found that well over $380 million were just wasted. And then we ask, who wasted that money? The Nigerian ruling class. The Nigerian ruling class, it doesn't look at face, doesn't look at your height or not, doesn't look at your tribe or anything when they are sharing money. They are one. And when I say the ruling class now, what I have in mind is this. You can look at, starting from the so-called traditional rulers, top clergymen and women, the business guru, they call the private sector, which is another ballgame altogether. And then the governing elites, those who are in political power. They form the ruling class. We the masses, we are just there. We are not part and parcel of the ruling class. But they are. And they churn out this policy and push it to the people. And these policies, market-driven, bring about inflation, starvation, unemployment. And don't forget, IMF already told them, go and cut down, sack people from work, have a very lean civil service. Companies are not working for them all, sell them and other stuff. So they took all that, what I call instruction from the IMF. And if you look very well, from that time till today, has anything changed? Instead, we are moving more. It looks as if the likes of Babangida, Abacha, even Obasanjo. No, it's not better. It looks as if, what I'm trying to say is that they were mild. They were careful. Say, my people will suffer too much. Don't let us do it this way. So they were doing what Yoruba call Majako Baje. You know if you are Yoruba man, but Oti Baje, tell. So all these guys, like Madam was saying about the so-called subsidy, which experts are still saying there's no subsidy anywhere. The other regimes were careful, we were pinching it gradually, and we'll come out, civil society will demonstrate, we'll shout. Now, have we been able to come out when the real day has come? The real day has come now. The way Bola Tinubu is taking loans. And Tinubu doesn't, he just look at what I'm talking about, need loan for deployment. But for purpose of argument, and to be frank, borrowing is not the problem. Yes. Borrowing is not the problem. I'll give you an example. After the Chinese Revolution in 1949, Chairman Mao, of blessed memory, needed money to develop China. And at least the revolution was just over and he needed funds again. He entered a train and went to Stanley in Russia and said, Stanley, I need money for development. And Stanley, it's okay. Stanley, although they were calling him Mawako, cave Marxist, but he gave the loan. But you know what happened? After Chairman Mao took that money, the Korean War broke out. Remember the South Korean, North Korean War in the 1950s something. And of course, we are at the height of the ideological struggle between socialism and capitalism, what you call the Cold War. America was funding and supporting South Korea. Then Russia was funding, then USSR and supporting North Korea. And so their allies have to push money. The allies of South Korea, led by USSR, push money to support North Korea. Stanley said the money he took from, Chairman Mao said the money he took from Stanley, he put it to support the war against South Korea. And he borrowed this money. Of course, the socialists were good, so they are still good. It's not the kind of marketing that the capitalists are doing. You understand what I'm saying? Their own is that make sure you do the project, implement it for your people. Mao said how he wasted that money and he was not happy at all. He couldn't use the money for the implement of his people. He felt bad. When the war, after the cessation of amnesty, what do you call it now? Agreement was reached and the war ended. Mao went back to Stanley and said, "Okay, you know the money you give me now, war will take our fight to. We don't have money for development." Stanley released money again for him. I said, "Okay, take this, go and work for people." And because Chairman Mao was very angry that the money he wanted to use for the development of his people had been used for something else war, he took the other money and worked for his people, build railways and all that stuff. The time frame for the loan, before the time frame, Mao took the money and said, "Chairman, Stanley, see your money." Stanley said, "How far? See, go and work." Say, "No, sir, I'm paying back." That is what do you call it, credit facilities for you. Or if you go to history, is it America? Is it Europe? Is it China? There's no way a country do not look source for external funding to borrow it. But the question is, what are you doing for the money? The double tragedy that Nigeria is facing is that, and the imperialists know this very well, our so-called creditors, that you have men and women who don't have their people at heart, is to line their pockets. And as we speak, you know, billions of our money that is stored in their various banks. That's the tragedy we are facing. Because if we had patriotic leaders, if we had men and women who really know what development is all about, and you take money, you invest it, and then before you know it, it will pay back. That's at one level. At another level is that you took money and funding programs that cannot, projects that cannot pay back. And then the third arm, you even stole the money to build your war chest. I call it ruling class capital formation process. Because the ruling class in Nigeria is empty. With due respect, very empty, backward, and then greedy. You understand? Greedy, they are empty, they are backward, they have no vision. A leader must have vision. So, when they take their own money, instead of going for the project, they share it among themselves and abandon the projects. Because I think, Taiwo, you said something just now, I'm happy. We are back again now to be begging for relief. Yes. Is that not so? Yes. All the money that we took, what did we do with it? And of course, it's natural that if you are lacking money for development, you go and look for where you can get money. There's nothing wrong about that. It's been proven that external funding can help, but must be used for the purpose. And then on projects that can pay back. That point is a bit. In our own case, no. We do not know how to do that. We take the money and then we just pocket it. That is why some of us reflecting that the Chinese loans may be something close to it, because right now there is an ideological war between China and the United States of America, arguing that Oh, don't mind China. They are just there for African resources. Don't mind them. Don't mind them. Blackmailing China. And I say, hot, oiling a kettle, black. And if you actually do a critical analysis of the Chinese loan, you find that they don't run on that 3-4-5% market rate of the so-called Western bloc. No. And the Chinese follow through. They follow through. Sometimes they monetize technology and whatever they want to come and use in your country. And then you convert it. You understand what I'm saying? And not just, I'll talk money, you go away. They may have their own problem. We want to talk about that later on. But you find out that, yes, you find that the Chinese loan are put into some developmental projects, which the Chinese are interested in seeing those projects running. Compared to those ones who just give people money and they go and sleep. They know that they will fail. They will be waiting for them. And as soon as they fail, they say, where are our money? And the interest, of course. So those are some of the things that we cannot shy away from, what do you call it, borrowing. Borrowing is not the problem. I maintain that borrowing is not the problem. The problem is what we do with the money we have borrowed. Do we have a disciplined ruling class? Do we have a ruling class that really have development as an agenda? Do we have a ruling class that is prepared to go the whole hog to get the people? No. The ruling class here is greedy. The ruling class here is not disciplined. The ruling class here lacks ideology. The ideologies are going to steal. That's what they have. So, like he already said, we are back again, begging. Going with the begging, we call it beggar's bar. The AU earlier this year, remember, I think in February, when they declared this so-called, this thing we are talking about now, oh, Europe are a problem, America is a problem, we want people to pay reparation, this and that. AU started it, and everybody said good. But then, beyond asking for reparation, which we're going to talk about too, the question still remains, what have you done with the money you have taken? But something that is also new now that is good, I must say it, no matter what we feel about Bola Tinubu, is that Tinubu is not allowing blows to just lie like that. One, he's paying. Yes. Because we discovered through our research that he's paying back. Yes. Yeah, he's servicing the debt. As we were talking about, the last one in June, $3.4 billion to he's paying. He's doing. I mean, he's been active. Again, we will commend the DMO for that. That follows the figure and say, oh God, this is the situation now. Even if you are going to take another one, this is what will be. There is some level of sensitivity, unlike before, where anything just goes. Now that's one. But that doesn't mean that the loan is taken is good though, because don't forget about the interest rate. Don't forget how that stuff. But at least it shows some responsibility on our part as a country to follow up our loans. And when they are due, whatever you need to pay, you pay. That gives you a lot of some sense of responsibility. Of course, the international community, that's what they want to hear. The other thing about what is doing with it, we are still watching, because we do know that we are infrastructure deficit. You all know, across this country, infrastructure is problematic. And money were taken in those days for this same infrastructure that they could not utilize. Now he's saying that he's going to build roads, or he's already building roads, building railways, and all that stuff. He's going to revive the industries and all that stuff. We pray that he continue on that line. So we are looking at the whole thing with suspicion. But you can't take away from him that he's servicing the debt. Do you know, ladies and gentlemen, that when he was put together the data, the amount of money we were owing, and she did that investigation, found that Nigeria, the money we paid for punishment for deferring to pay when due was $5 billion US. It's documented. She wrote it in her book, Reforming the Unreformable. And even the last book she wrote on corruption and all that stuff. She documented. I mean, you take a loan and you don't have the good conscience to say you have to pay back. No, even the interest and the capital, at least. But you just went away. And just was okay. If the due time is there and you refuse to pay, this is a penalty. The penalty is some more money is put on your loan. And so the loan gets off expense. She did a good work on that. And with the DMO, we are not able to track our debt, and we are not able to say this one is due, this one is due, and then we service it. Some level of responsibility. Then the other point is this. When I went from World Bank took over the management of our economy and came out with this so-called PSI, the Policy Support Instrument. They also know that we were entering the market, the so-called free market economy. And that means that all loans, apart from the constitutional loans from sometimes grants from World Bank, and the constitutional loans are free. So, I mean, there are few, I mean to say, from the London Club and all that stuff. The other loans that are taken on market rate, you must service. If you do not, it's waiting for you. So, these are the issues. Now, debt repudiation, which I said I canvassed 20 years ago, following the very radical Marxist political economic line. Cuba did repudiate its debt after the Castro Revolution of 1999. America repudiated its debt in the 19th century. We see Argentina and Brazil. The latest one I can point and figure out to is, these guys, Sudan, South Sudan, that broke away from the Republic of Sudan. Immediately that republic started, the leadership said, sorry, this loan, we are liquidating it. That's 2011. And the international community, they are not seeing what they have done. That is the latest case of repudiation, 2011, in Africa, by the new state, Sudan, that broke away from the Republic of Sudan. So, repudiation is not a new thing. But guess what? The Nigerian authorities frown at it, they don't want to hear it. They call us names forever mentioning repudiation. And then they gave us a long list of what we will suffer if we try to repudiate our debts. Of course, they're talking about our assets being confiscated. Of course, in the American case, and even in one of these European countries, if I can remember, where they refused. So someone goes to lead to some form of war because they have the capacity, the so-called international capital, to invade your country, to punish you, to seize your assets abroad if you refuse to pay. Of course, I'm happy my friend is here, the international lawyer. You know the legal background. We will also ask you to talk to us during the panel that if you don't pay or you predict or no, there are legal implications. And what's all is all that the state you are owing, you are in America, I say you don't pay. Trump can order them to take over Nigeria. Yes, they can invade your country once they establish that you are not following the rules. Though sanctions, serious sanctions will be imposed on you and all that stuff. So these are the implications. But do you know, like the Cuban case, let's go back to Cuba. Why was it possible for Fidel to repudiate the debt and the people stood and defended him? It was possible because, one, don't forget about the Cold War then. The US was behind Cuba. Two, the people of Cuba made huge sacrifice till today. Italian by Comado, and all that stuff. And in doing that, you are filtering away foreign exchange, hard currency, and then fueling the market, helping the market in Europe and America to do well, and then you kill the market here. So, we the citizens are also making some contribution to this misfortune that's happening to us. Again, we can argue that it may be ignorance, because the government is failing in the sense that they are not mobilizing people enough. They are not sensitizing people enough. They are not. And that is a failure on their part. And that's why I say sometimes that they lack vision. There are things that our country will do, and we stand by it and defend it. And I give an example with the Cuba and the old socialist country in Eastern Europe. And the people stood up, no matter what it was. But in Nigeria, the masses, I don't know, they are the first to complain. And government will just say, okay, I told you, they go back. So let's keep on bringing this stuff outside. And by that, foreign exchange, our reserve goes down, and the debt continues to balloon. Because government has to pay or guarantee people who are going to bring something abroad, which they don't longer pay for. So there is a way that we have been contributing ourselves. That kind of a country, if you have a leadership that says, okay, ladies and gentlemen, we want to face this thing once and for all. We want to develop our country. If we die, we die. If we live, we live. But this is the options we are taking one by one. Like I told you, the Cuban experience. Will Nigeria prepare for that? One. Two, the leadership is able to prepare for that. Because if that happens, then the money they are making for imperialism, because it's like a stage. The imperialist master are there, our leaders second, and with the masses third. You get my point? And so our leaders, the so-called political leaders, have to take from whatever they have taken here, pay the imperialists their own, and also help themselves. So even the leadership is interested in that what we call primitive accumulation of wealth. And so they push that agenda so long as they get their own. So That is the kind of scenario that we are seeing. Now, let's look at illicit financial flow. I think we talked about it earlier. Somebody mentioned it. Ribadu, when he was EFCC director, told us about $500 billion Nigeria money stashed abroad. Then one young man who came, who later was removed by Buhari, one young, I can't remember his name, Bawa says, at that time he was leaving office, it was already $800 billion US. That is Nigerian money, taken by Nigerian leaders, hidden in different corners of the world. And when, you remember Tony Blair and the other guy in France and the guy in Germany, they come up with this African team, support African understand. They now started putting a track on money that are coming from Africa into Europe or America. I say no more. You know what they did? And people now diverted to the Caribbean. There is a huge amount of Nigerian money lying in the Caribbean countries. Are you following me? So when this last Oga visit to St. What do you call it, Lucia, I mean, if you are a critical observer of Nigerian political economy, you didn't know be told what is going on. And I think we are now having relationship with St. Lucia. Those St. Lucia, Barbados, and all of them. Brazil. Brazil is also suffering. Those Caribbean islands, remember them? Yeah. Of course, they didn't start it. The Europeans and Americans started it, putting money in those small countries in what Jeffrey Hill called offshore money. They are doing it now. So the Caribbean countries are the ones accepting them. I'm not saying Europe is no longer accepting them, but the money has to pass through a lot of processes. Sometimes you are caught and they push you back. They are even just one of our people for that illicit subject that they are doing. So the states, those in power will do that. They need that. Because when you ask them, what are you guys keeping all this money for? They say they are building generational wealth. Generational wealth, through the sweat of the people. The people are dying on a daily basis. Inflation and what have you. That's it. So these are the issues. Now, the AU, as usual, I call it a club of, sorry not to use hard language on them, but the AU is unserious. The AU cannot be serious with the character of persons who are leading Africa. The AU cannot be revolutionary with the character of men and women who are in the hands of power in Africa, except for one or two countries that will see responsible governance. Across is, stomach infrastructure leaders. And so, this same AU, this February, saying that, okay, we are looking for reparation. We condemn historical injustice to us, blah, blah, blah. We asked them, where were you many years back? These are struggles that civil society organizations have waged over the time across Africa. Afrodad here and many other organizations, Aneej and others, have been on this struggle. But all of a sudden, the AU said, now let us pursue, social and cultural justice. And so that they should return our money to us. They should, okay, if they're not returning the money, they should write off the debt of Africa. Are you following? Who does that in the so-called free market economy? And don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, that these loans that we are bearing belong to individuals. Yes. Individuals own those money. Those individuals are sleeping in their house, waiting for their profit and interest. So the AU new position, calling for reparation, remembering that historical justice will be done. It's not bad. We're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. What we should do as a society is that we go ahead to continue to canvass for reparation and all that stuff along the line. But I told my mind says, we society should not depend on AU, because AU and the leadership can abandon you anytime. You may be surprised the next AU meeting, this matter will nobody will talk about reparation again. But now it's making noise all over the world because the character of the people who live in Africa. But if you have to, even the late Archbishop Tutu of South Africa, we may have to also find a way to get important, voices that are seen to be, strong on the global stage, to also key into whatever network we want to do now to demand for reparation. That kind of coalition will help civil society cause. Now, some persons in Europe, talking about this so-called reparation team, is this guy, Professor Robinson, who led what we call the Brattle panel. The Brattle panel in Europe came out with positions on this so-called historical injustice done to us, and identified the number of people that were taken away from Africa, that built the European economy and all that stuff, and say it is time for reparation. They didn't stop there. Professor Robinson and his member, okay, no, it was a judge, a high court judge. He used to be in the ICJ. It's a ICJ judge, who sat down with a panel, came out with a position that they even cost it. They put value to it now. They are saying between $180 trillion. Yes. If you see the cost, it's in this paper, maybe you can read it, that Robinson and his friends put together and said, look, Europe was called to answer for their historical injustice to us, for the slavery and all that stuff. Of course, the British Prime Minister found that they said, just don't mind them, they are looking for what to say. But that judge went ahead to push that agenda and got more people involved. So the cost of what they are owing us has been codified, has been worked out by Justice Robinson and his group. It's called the Brattle Group. You Google it, you will see it. And so you can no longer blackmail us and say, hey, you are looking for the pension. How much do we even pay you? Can you tell us how much we are owing us? The Brattle Group is saying, look, your economy was built by the sweat of our people. Everything you had by the sweat of our people. Now we are codified it. $18 trillion, at one level. And then they also say, look, the other option is that you can cancel all the debts that you are owing all African. That all African countries are owing you. Cancel it. And they still give us some change, because we know that the money that the all Africa are owing you is not $100 trillion that you are owing us. It's a very serious group in the UK, and they are moving on. And I also think too, please, that we should link up with the Brattle Group led by Justice Robinson. Now, let's talk about Caribbean. That is the Caribbean Commission that is also doing similar things. Now, let me briefly talk about challenges facing the reparation and reparatory justice struggle. Mention a few of them, and then also think about what we should do. It is not challenging to identify the challenges facing the reparatory justice and reparation movement. From discussion so far, we can isolate some of the difficulties and challenges the movement is facing now, the challenge to face in the future. The struggle for reparations by African youth at home and in the diaspora has been on for well over 2 decades now. The efforts of Pan-African activists can also be classified as part of the struggle. In short, that brings me to this ongoing so-called repatriation of stolen artifacts. My Oba in Benin has been celebrating that his ancestral stuff that were taken from him, they are back. But there's a question we are asking. Those artifacts were put in their museum, they made huge money. Are you following me? Now, where is that money? I think we should be bold enough in civil society to say, Mr. Goodman, who is now repatriating our artifact, what of the money that you pay for it? Or the other question is this: whether our traditional rulers are collecting and they're not telling us. Maybe these guys are very complex. So we should challenge them to, Oga, Your Royal Majesty, you've gotten so many of these things. How much follow and come? Yes, storage. But I'm thinking that no money came with it. These Europeans are very crafty people.
We have returned it.
Yes, we have returned it. I'm thinking that but by the time we make statement like this, you hear people start saying, wow, these people can't go here, say, but they follow this. I think some benefits. But we can take advantage of that by asking the Europeans and whatever, please pay us equivalent of the number of years this stayed in your museum and the money you make. Because when you go to the museum in London, you pay. Plus interest. So that's one leg of it. So even the return of artifacts is first itself also reparation. The only thing that is still missing there is, where is the aid? We should ask them, because those things can help us. Africa must put its house in order to speak with one voice. That's a point. Sometimes, in February or January this year, African leaders met. I was here in Abuja, where they were complaining about this thing, what do you call this people that do the so-called rating? This rating, and the rest of them. That rating are not favorable to us. And some of them were even of African origin. Yes, and that they are creating problem for us. But the way they are declaring all kinds of things against African countries, and they condemn it, and they insisted that look, henceforth we want good people. People, organizations that can do rating for us, and not the one that will put us down. But they also took a position there that look, it's time for us to begin to have African, debt law, as you have a Paris law and the London law. So Africa, they met. It was in Abuja. It was in January, February. I think they're also moving towards that direction to talk about a club where they can negotiate collectively. Because what has happened is that individual countries go and negotiate. It's easier for our creditors to shortchange individual. But if all work together, though Madam made reference to how we abandoned, how Nigeria abandoned the rest of them, 2005, made that small change, the so-called change, which was not there, and forget. So we must put on the front burner that an African debt club should be established. And I'm also thinking we may not leave that in the hands of those in government. It should be something that should be within the civil society to campaign and demand. And maybe if we push the envelope, it's possible government might begin to say they need to also key into it and say form an African debtors club with which we then negotiate collectively.
That sounds like ABC.
But African civil society and social movements must sustain the demand for reparations in all global meetings. Yes. Leo, you mentioned the survey team. Please, those meetings should continue and you keep on making that demand for reparation. In doing so, African civil society groups must liaise with honest and genuine civil society groups in the global north to mount pressure on the governments of the global north. African leaders and civil society should find a way to get BRICS bloc, and that also reminds me, the BRICS bloc, Brazil, Russia, China, and South Africa. Remember the BRICS bloc? It's coming up now as a very strong bloc, and America is being threatened when they push the de-dollarization agenda. And we hear Trump saying, "Don't mind them; they cannot run it. Nobody can run it." The leader of India went to meet him in Washington, and he was like, what are you going to do with these BRIC blocks? I was trying to cast aspersion on the BRIC bloc. But I know that with China there, with Russia there, it is matured to become a very strong club that will make good demands on the so-called global north and try to extract something from them. So we must liaise with the BRICS bloc. It's very important. And if it means helping them to push the argument that they are making for de-dollarization, which is already happening, you can convert the Chinese money now to Nigeria. Nigerian money can be converted straight. They buy and sell to you directly, and you pay with naira. And all that will go on. If it goes on, it will weaken the American dollar, and all these grad they are making will begin to go down. So the BRICS bloc is a very serious challenge to the global north. I think we should also identify with that. Now, although the battle group led by Justice Patrick Robinson has calculated the amount to be paid in reparations to Africa, we think that more still need to be done by civil society. So let us not rest on our say the battle group has done the calculation. We can help. In short, imagine if we then coordinate the artifacts that they are returning and put money to it. You can see, and join it with what the battle group is saying. The money will be large, and they will be morally wept, and they know it because even some characters in Europe and America are telling them you have been evil to Africa. It's time for you to do the right thing. So we should not stop, say because the battle group has put money to what they should pay us. We should continue to work it out. Experts, economists, men and women who have knowledge should begin to dramatize because everything is ideas. Ideas govern the world. When we put our heads together, we can also put figure, and that will help the battle group more. Said although the battle group led by Justice Patrick Robinson has calculated the amount to be paid as reparations to Africa, we think that more still need to be done by the civil society groups, the clergy, and state governments in Africa to work out the amount that Europe and the US should pay to Africa as reparations. Also, subcontinental bodies such as ECOWAS, Arab League, SADC, that's the African Development Commission, the East African Economic Community, the Maghreb region should be contacted and encouraged to join their voices to the struggle. Subcontinental groups, ECOWAS, SADC, the Maghreb, all those guys in the subcontinent, we should, across Africa and Europe and America, we should work with them, the Maghreb region. Okay? African society groups must link up with CARICOM. That is critical. That is a Caribbean group. That one is even governmental. pushed by the government. Liquor CARICOM and other international non-governmental organizations to strategize on how to sustain the demand. However, we are hopeful that this conference will be able to come up with some tactics and strategies to sustain the struggle for reparation and reparatory justice to Africa and the rest of the global South, who suffered the violation of their humanity by Japan and their allies. Thank you for listening to me. God bless you.
The issue is also how you manage the borrowed funds in terms of how that money is used, but also what is the money, the debt that you have incurred on behalf of the country, what are you using that debt for? And I think it's very important for citizens to be able to engage in terms of tracking how borrowed funds are being used. So just to flag that. Just to come down to another very, some thoughts that I was writing down here before I get into reparations, if you will kindly allow me. I just need to raise the fact that there is no free money. Whenever the government of Nigeria or any African government borrows, the money comes with conditionalities. And we do know that the IMF and the World Bank are the biggest lenders to African countries. Prof has pointed out China. China is coming out as a very big player in terms of offering, quote unquote, a solution to African countries. But we know that their terms and conditions are even worse than the IMF and the World Bank. So China is not a solution. So there's no free money. Number two, the World Bank and the IMF are not your friends. They are not your friends. And I was just discussing here with Taiwo, they're just coming from the FFD meeting. The IMF told us to our faces that there's no debt crisis. They say there's no debt crisis. They say debt is contained. Despite the fact that there's evidence showing that we have over 22 countries in debt distress, we already have 4 countries that have defaulted on their debt. We've already talked about how countries are forced to service debt over social spending, but the IMF told us to our faces there's no debt crisis. So you're not dealing with a friend here. The IMF and the World Bank are not your friends. And then something interesting to note is when we talk about the way the system works, is that the countries that are making the decisions are the global north countries. This is the US, the Canadas, all this Japan, these big countries, they're the ones making the decision. Africa has 54 member states, correct? Yes. But we are not on the table when these decisions, the very big decisions on financing are being made. Africa only has 5% share in terms of the IMF quota. So when we are talking about recommendations, one of the recommendations that were coming even from the member states at the Financing for Development meeting is that Africa needs to have a bigger share in quota so that we can be able to make the decisions. We can be able to actually influence the percentage of financing that goes to African countries. At the moment, as African states, we do not have any decision-making power as it is. And then something very interesting to note as well is that private sector is coming out as a very big player. Prof talked about privatization. And just coming from the Financing for Development meeting, I can tell you with confidence that the private sector was echoed as a solution to financing when it comes to filling the gap, as they call it. But as we know, private money goes for profit. They put profit over people. And this is something that civil society needs to call out. Even tell the Nigerian government that you cannot go for private money. It's not going to solve any solution. So we need to be very careful about pushing private as a solution. The former speaker who we were with on the panel talked about debt swaps. Debt swaps are very dangerous. There's evidence that shows the conditionalities that are placed on countries for taking debt swaps. There's also evidence that shows the issues of transparency. There's no transparency when it comes to the contracts that countries are getting into for debt swaps. So Nigeria has to be very careful when they're taking on debt swaps. It's not going to be a solution. It's going to cause Nigeria to fall further into debt traps. And then I just want to get into the recommendations because of time, but also something that we need to note again in terms of the issue of what Prof has raised on having an Africa Debtors Club. There's already a borrowers club that is existing, and in that borrowers club, African countries are sitting down. I think the UNECA, UNCTAD are the ones that are actually pushing the borrowers club. The Africa Union is also there. And it's very important that we familiarize ourselves with the borrowers club because it brings the creditors and the lenders together. And one of the recommendations, even coming from Financing for Development, is having a more fair and equitable process where lenders and borrowers can come together. As it is right now, the borrowers and lenders are not together. It is the borrowers that are dictating. I mean, it is the creditors that are dictating everything. So the lenders or the borrowers are not on the table. So the borrowers club actually is sort of equal to or similar to the proposal to have a debtors club because it brings the creditors and the borrowers together on the same table so that they are part of the process. So just to note that. And then I'm not sure if any of us has ever seen a debt contract. Has anyone seen a debt contract? Yeah, but majority of the people have not seen a debt contract. So one of the recommendations would be transparency and accountability, which has been stated, and then having provisions for responsible borrowing and lending. And just for our information, the Africa Union recently held an Africa Union meeting on debt. So Prof, just to let you know that the Africa Union is working very hard to ensure that debt becomes like a big thing for the continent. And from that meeting, we have the Lome Declaration on Debt, which our member states signed on to. And they actually talked about enforcing laws that require parliamentary approval for debt contraction and comprehensive reporting on debt utilization with a view to strengthening transparency and accountability. So we cannot talk about debt without talking about the role of Parliament. Is there any member of Parliament present here? No. So we do need members of Parliament, specifically in the committee on on budgets and finance, and even on public accounts, need to be very involved in terms of debt contraction. That really helps the country to keep the debt at a manageable level because many members of Parliament are not involved in contracting. Then another very clear position that came from the Lome Declaration is about UNCTAD principles on responsible borrowing and lending, which is something we've talked about here. Then, of course, unite to demand for debt cancellation as part payment of the climate debt and other reparations owed by rich countries. This is something big for us. And this is in the Lome Declaration from the Africa Union, which our member states signed on to. So as civil society, these are some of the things we should be asking our government, including the Nigerian government, in terms of how are you going to implement commitments that you made at the Lome Togo meeting of the Africa Union member states. Then a very big one on paragraph 44 of the Lome Declaration is on advocating for reform of the global debt architecture through the establishment of a UN Framework Convention on Sovereign Debt. And this proposed framework creates a more comprehensive, fair, and effective multilateral mechanism for preventing and resolving sovereign debt crises. So this framework convention will be legally binding, providing timely, adequate debt relief. So this comes from the Financing for Development meeting. So what happened is that this paragraph was actually taken out of the final outcome document. But what is encouraging is that we do have a language around establishing an intergovernmental framework. What does this mean for us at the national level? It means we need to push our ministries to ensure that we have a process at the national level with regards to responsible borrowing and lending, with regards to binding mechanisms, with regards to having an equal voice as a country when it comes to how the global debt architecture works. And then something very important is carrying out debt audits. I think we've talked about illegitimate debt, which is also part of reparations. It's very important for the Nigerian government to carry out a debt audit. Kenya, we already have a debt audit process going on. The president of Kenya actually instituted a commission to do debt audits, and they're supposed to give a report in terms of the debts that are owed by previous governments. And there's also a current case in Kenya where the government has been taken to court on odious debt, something that maybe Nigeria should be thinking about as well. Then, of course, the linkage between illicit financial flows and debt. If we are able to curb the illicit financial flows that we are losing as Nigeria or even as Africa, this can be used to actually finance our spending, to finance our social services, to finance our development, and then we move out of the debt trap. And finally, I agree with Prof in terms of Africa speaking as one voice. Let me give you a very practical example. Because we've engaged in the financing for development negotiations, let me tell you, Europe cannot be brought down, the EU that is, the European Union, because they speak as one voice. When they say we are not going to do this, they say, and I support the European Union position. But when it comes to Africa, unfortunately, we give diverse or different positions that puts us at a very vulnerable place. So it's very important for us as civil society to continue lobbying our government to work together with other African governments, especially when it comes to negotiations of debt or negotiations of financing. When we speak as one voice, it gives us more leverage instead of speaking as diverse voices. Thank you.
Of course, particularly for Nigeria. As we were talking, I was recollecting the works of Adebayo Olukoshi. I also remember the works of Milton Iyoha on, structural adjustment, revenue management, and of course, Professor Egosa Osagai on his book, The Crippled Giant. How Nigeria has underperformed. Then Joseph Stiglitz talked about globalization and its discontent. Then Jeffrey Sachs talked about SDGs. Then finally, our highly revered social scientist, the late Professor Claude Ake, also wrote a book on revolutionary pressures in Africa. Your paper actually encapsulates some of these thoughts that have been popularized by this highly respected academia. So thank you very much. On the issues that you raised, number one, do we have a national strategy that supports our negotiations when we are going to negotiate with the IMF and the World Bank, and of course the Chinese government? What's our national strategy around what we want to use this debt for? When we are incurring debt, what do we have in mind? And how do we intend to pay back? Because I don't like this idea of you have gone to borrow money, midway, you are now asking for cancellation, repudiation, or running away. How? He doesn't show responsibility. We are in a one world. So all of us in the civil society ecosystem, when we are calling for debt cancellation or repudiation, we must first of all sit down with our people, which is the government, to say, okay, when we are going to incur this debt, what was on our mind? And how far have we gone? That's where accountability comes in. So we must first of all clean our audience table around some of these issues. Then the cost of running government is key. In my initial opening remarks, I talked about how people are using our, driving convoy. One person will have 20 vehicles in his car. They are paying themselves generous allowances. And yet, the IMF, they have their offices here in Abuja and Lagos. They see all these things. The country that the World Bank, they are here in Asokoro. They see all these things. And when we go to them saying that our people are poor, they are suffering, we have over 85 million of our people are living on less than $1 a day, but they see how our government are, so they are laughing within themselves that why are we not holding our government accountable? Then procurement reforms. How do we procure our contracts? Do we overblow our contracting systems? A contract, a road, a 100-kilometer road that goes for, let's say, $1 million in Ghana. Why will it go for $5 million in Nigeria? The same project that goes for $500,000 in Mali, for instance, will go for ×3. So these are some of the issues we should be looking at. Our procurement reforms is key. We need to invest in our procurement reforms that prioritizes efficiency, reduce waste and fraud. Then, of course, restructuring of the national appropriation architecture in favor of development. As I said, our national appropriation is completely hijacked by the National Assembly as we speak. The former President Olusegun Obasanjo resisted them. He resisted them. He had a big fight with them between 1999 and 2007. And, you know, but since then they've grown wings. Koyaraduwa was sick. Jonathan was living on eggshell. He wanted a second term, so he didn't really have time to have issues in the National Assembly. Then, of course, Buhari was always not aware. And now, now we have gone into politics again. So nobody is really sitting down to hold the National Assembly accountable for padding our budget. Our budget is padded and it's not addressing the needs of our people. Then, my number 5 item is why do we go for debt? And what is the cost of incurring debt rather than investing in domestic resource mobilization? How much have we invested in formalizing the economy? Nigeria is a huge economy, for instance. We can actually fund our needs, not our wants. We can fund our basic needs, primary healthcare systems, basic education, security, construction of small roads to our farm centers, you know, empowering our security, the police and the vigilantes. Then, of course, food security for the poor. These are the needs of the people, not buying bulletproof vehicles and all of those things. So, when we reduce all these things and prioritize our expenditure, we actually discover that there's no need for us to first of all incur debt and for us to now be talking or calling for cancellation, because we can actually sustain ourselves. Then, the IMF and the World Bank, I sit on the panel on social protection at the Civil Society Policy Forum in Washington. And the question we always ask them, why do we calculate our debt on debt to GDP ratio? That when we have 28% debt to GDP, then we are on course. We can still incur up to 40%. But GDP is not cash per se. It's the total calculation of the total economic activities in the country, including the money in your pocket and your small savings. Those are some of the things that are calculated as GDP. So are they going to collect how if Nigeria is now indebted or Nigeria has defaulted? Will they now tell me to bring my savings in my pocket, or the money my mother's farmland, she should go and sell her plantain and give it to the Nigerian government to pay the debt which has not impacted on her? So we must start to, we must sit down and start rethinking about this debt to GDP ratio, because GDP is not cash. It's the total money all of us have. It's not government money. So calculating our debt as a percentage of GDP is deceitful, and we need to look at it. So, Prof, I completely agree with you that not all loans are bad, and that's why I'm always very excited using the case of Morocco. You know, during the COVID, Morocco, just like Nigeria, collected some money from IMF, the special drawing right. While we were still thinking of what to do with it, they invested their own in agriculture. Tomato industry, you can Google it, and within 18 months they paid back, because there was a lot of demand for tomato in Europe and oranges for the production of vitamin C. Morocco quickly invested in tomato and oranges, and they paid back the IMF loan. I think it's recently that I heard that it was reported that Nigeria has paid back. So not all loans are bad, but they must be particularly structured in such a way that they can fund themselves. Then, of course, there's no way in Nigeria where you can see a World Bank funded road project with underground drainage, with street light, with walkways and all of that. But when you go to Ghana, you go to Tunisia, you see railways. You see things that have been done by the World Bank. So we need to export some of those examples to Nigeria so that we will no longer be running away from paying our debt. Accountability and transparency in relationship management, and of course in negotiating meetings. There must be transparency. Then reparative justice can only come in through DFIs. I don't think that let us not embark on a campaign that will be dead on arrival. So what we need to do is to create an enabling environment that will encourage direct foreign investment. So what we lost during colonialism, what we lost during slavery, we can actually get it back if we create an enabling environment for security, for infrastructure. When the Europeans and Americans are coming to Nigeria, they feel safe. The Chinese are coming, they are not afraid of being kidnapped. Then we can gradually, on a long-term basis, get back what they are owing us through direct foreign investment, grants that support economic growth, power generation, food security, and of course, and its associated value chain, then supports to small and medium-scale enterprises. I support publish what you owe, publish what you service, publish what you are spending on, publish what you earn, and of course, no to debt cancellation. Should SDR be disbursed as a matter of right? Because the present architecture is that the special drawing rights is usually shared on the basis of your right as a shareholder in IMF. But should that actually be? Because you now go and give money to somebody who does not even have plan on how to spend that money. The case study of Nigeria, we got $3.2 billion. You cannot say this was what the money was spent for, but we have paid back money that are supposed to be spent on support for research and development for the universities, primary healthcare, support for our market women in SMEs. We have paid it back to IMF without a tangible project to show for it. So it is on this basis I want to thank you for listening to me, and I think you guys will come back later. Thank you.
And two, of why Obasanjo borrowed that money. I think myself and my brother Leo didn't really have the background of what he borrowed it for. I didn't know that it was for Ajaokuta. But that's an example that at one point, the World Bank had so much money and they needed to go out and look for borrowers. And so it's a deliberate effort to look at the viable economies to go and ensure that they are able to borrow. When Venezuela paid their money, overnight, about over 2,000 World Bank officials lost their jobs because they were all on Venezuela loan. And that is to tell you that what I earlier told you in the morning, it means there is a correlation. When they borrow for you, your very own money is what will sustain a lot of people are put on employment. And so if you look at the fact that very example, because Obasanjo, he has a lot of positives and he has his negatives. Because Obasanjo, during his time, in 1976 or thereabout, for some of us who were struggling, especially for the girl child, going to school at that time was so tough. Being in the northern part of Nigeria, schooling for the girl child, guys are supposed to take care of you, so you are not supposed to go to school. Your voices will not be, no matter how brilliant. I thought I was a brilliant girl, and I wanted education, but I was pushed back, and my brother was being given advantage over me because seniority, but I was beating him. Mathematics, I will have 6/6, and he will have 0/6. But they wanted him because he is the one who is going to marry a woman in the future and all of that. And so, when you look at that, but, Obasanjo administration, Nigeria had so much money. During Gowon, Nigeria had so much money, they didn't know what to do with it. Yeah. And that's why when I campaign and talk about, for the youth, Gowon was 32. People like the ministers were 29 years old and all of that. But the lack of ideology, that's why we must have intergenerational thoughts to be able to bring on board the kind of plans that we need for Nigeria. He was the one, it was Obasanjo that gave free education that made me to, when I was struggling, I wanted to go to school. So they said, go and look for the money. And I'll go from one place to the other, nobody to give me. In fact, I was giving up and said, okay, God, whatever it is. But he gave us, this for the younger generation, this will be a story. He gave us a free education, the school where I worked. I had 7 uniforms. 7 different uniforms, free from the government of Nigeria. Why wouldn't I do well for Nigeria? People had scholarship that they were going out of the country, you go and read and you come back. Why wouldn't you? That was investment in the human capital. And I always say that when you invest in the human capital, which is a social structure that has been knocked down, when you invest, you are investing in the economy of your people. For the human resources that will occupy that space, you are not doing them a favor. You are developing the human capital for your economy. But what we have today, but what we are having now, and so that was Obasanjo that pulled it then. And they came to him. He didn't need the money, but they came for Ajaokuta. And then you look at the complexity of the subjugation. Is that who wants you to get Ajaokuta right? Because the steels will transform the whole of this country and transform the economy of this country. So who is subjugating? Who has put a lead to make sure, because they have brought Companies after companies, they are not working. That will also tell you, Nigeria had some money that was on ground for, I think, for electricity. You know, during Obasanjo too, companies came to Nigeria. And I was on holiday. Sometimes I'm on holiday and then maybe trouble look for me or I look for trouble somewhere. I was in Montana, somewhere, you know, close in the US, one small, you know, town. And I was there where I was giving the story of the technical people that came to Nigeria. They came to inspect Kainji Dam. And they gave the report back. They said Nigeria can give light 24/7 for the whole of the country and 5 additional countries without, 24 hours. They finished their engagement and they put it together. I think it was supposed to cost Nigeria about 14 billion. I'm not sure of the figure now. $14 billion. Then either 14 or 12 billion. I think it was 14. But the technical committee asked them to add 2 billion. Just put in 2 billion. That one is not your money. Just give us the money. But put it. That means it's going to be 16 billion. Yeah. And then, everything will be done. The guys were shocked. Because this is a country that they say is a poor country. And then they have to, because companies abroad have their own moral obligation. Yeah. And they say we cannot do this to Nigeria. According to them, then, they went back to the president. They said, well, the technical committee are the ones in charge and all whatnot. And that money was voted for. Where is the money now? The money is nowhere. You talked about ecology fund that we said we should look for. The ecology fund was voted for. Where is the draining of the river Niger that is drowning people, river Niger and the river Benue, that is drowning, people every season? The flood that we're having in this country, sometimes the figure that you gave of 133 million Nigerians in multidimensional poverty, that was in 2022. Yeah. And at that time, we didn't have the kind of flood that we had that year, which brought down about 31, states underwater. And so the poverty that we're talking about. Who wants you to get out of it? When we don't have light, those who are selling generators and everything, they are making money. So if you want to have light, it will also fight like a corruption fighting against corruption. There is a lot. So how do you get out of this poverty that we are talking about? The loans that are being given, a lot of it has moratorium. Yes. What that means is that you who is borrowing, you have no duty, just borrow. First. They give you a comfort level. In your time, they say 10 years moratorium. So you are not paying yet. But that means the government that is paying will be out when the payment starts. Yes. And so you are comfortable. Will you borrow money for your children to pay? Oh. So why don't we personalize some of the issues that were put on board? So not getting out of it, I just want to pull down that we are now working for them in our own countries. So it's a different strategy. They borrow, and so you continue to work and pay. So they don't need to come to your country to even come and invest. So when you say, let's give them an environment where they will come and invest, who has invested? Obasanjo told the whole world to bring investment. Who came? The next government had told, and all of that, and it comes to that. So I think what they have strategized for is to pull us down. The social welfare of other countries, when people are telling you to hands off education, if you're a citizen of Britain, most of your schools are free. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you are paying, if I pay, the kind of tax that we pay is almost 40% that we are paying. My colleagues in Europe, if they are paying that kind of tax, their children's education has always been catered for. Yes. Their social welfare, everything is catered for. But in Nigeria, you pay that tax and then you look for money for your children's schools. And so it's a huge difference. So there are stages. The welfare of the people ought to have been prioritized. We talked about the social investment program. The social investment is something we're doing. I went to Brazil. I think that was 2009. I led a team to Brazil to study the Bolsa Familia. How Brazil was able to jumpstart a lot of people out of poverty. And so we came back and we tried to talk to Nigeria. At that time, we formed the African Social Protection Platform, ActionAid and many Oxfam and so many other organizations came together. And we pulled that out. But Nigeria was not ready to talk about it at that time. We were happy when Buhari decided to bring in the National Social Investment Program. And they were doing well. Or those who they were talking about, what is 5,000 worth? I am telling you, that the hands where that 5,000 got to, they needed people who transformed their lives.
That's true.
And ActionAid, when I was country director of ActionAid, we were called in, to try to do whatever we could to help. And we gave them because we engaged the government. But we also have the capacity, a lot of capacities that government doesn't have. So in order for proper governance, we come in and we ensure that we're able to put our, we recruited civil society organizations from the 36 states plus Abuja, and many partners here worked on that. But when COVID-19 came, and now social development, in terms of the National Social Investment Program, which is supposed to be a short intervention to jumpstart something, functioning very well under, the vice president then, Yemi Osinbajo. They decided to take it and plot it into a humongous Ministry of Humanitarian Disaster Management and Social Development.
The ministry itself is disaster.
Which became a disaster. And I looked at it and then they said, when they called the minister at that time, he said, who is monitoring this? You say you want to give money while people are on holiday. Because COVID-19, everybody was at home. You say you want to submit ActionAid because we believe in transparency and accountability. What we can't account for, we walk out.
Yes.
We ended our monitoring of the system right there. I said, because with Miriam Ways, Hajia Miriam Ways, we can call her even in the middle of the night as we are tracking all the issues across the country, and they react immediately. As I ask them, who do I talk to now? They say it's the minister. I say, I will be calling the minister to ask what at that time. I just want to tell you that the civil society organizations, we are overburdened, but we try and we go with evidence. We make suggestions where we feel there is an opening for you to do something positive for Nigeria. And then the management fee of the loans, 40%, if it's less than that. And the last example was one of the things. So I was put in a group, with the minister and other people, in a group and said, they want to get 500 million for Nigeria and whether I should advise and all of that. I told the person that put my name to take, I took myself out. I said, tell me what you want. I will not go and negotiate another loan on behalf of Nigeria. I won't do that. But tell me, I will give you the technical, whatever that you need, capacity that you need to be able to debate, but don't put my name there. I withdrew myself from there. The complaint already is that, where is the document? You want me to sign on this? That is that some civil society can say, yes, this is it, and all of that. Where is the document? Before I sign on anything, we are very, very conscious. The issue of corruption in all of these loans, corruption in Nigeria. My dear brothers and sisters, the soul, many souls are very dirty. The quality of citizenship in Nigeria and the quality of citizenship in Africa, in the struggle through these social deprivations, many have fallen. Many have fallen. We also see the conviction, and I went through the loan that I talked about earlier. I was shouting because we got to a meeting where somebody, some state officials, some commissioners, for the 7 states that were refused because it has been taken already. Yes. And it's taken on behalf of those states before they remove the money before they give you your allocation. Yes, no, right. It's been taken after them. Yes. It was when a civil servant wanted to say this loan or this grant, I said, excuse me, can you call it what it is? He said, don't be too hard now. Okay, loan. And do you know that after that, World Bank people, they discussed among themselves. Then they didn't have vision in Nigeria. They discussed among themselves, and they called me outside. One of them called me and said, "Ene, what's your problem? The loan has been taken, long taken. And so what's your problem?" And they called that to come and harass me. I looked at the person and I told USAID, I will never go into this meeting again. Call somebody else, because that's my duty. In looking at the loans, if you remember Obla also of the EFCC, that he talked about a 69 billion, if some of you, is it 69 or 59 billion? It was a task force. At that time, that 69 billion is sitting at a Nigerian account. $1 billion. Is it $1 billion or £1 billion?
Dollars.
Okay, dollars. Sitting in an account. He gave the report to, this was Buhari, and all of them, they shut him down. Where is the 69 billion? Ladies and gentlemen, the quality, we are writing our history. CSOs having identity, Pan-Africanism at one time, way down. I think people are facing survival difficulties, and I can recognize that went. I am happy with your recommendation of the Caribbean movement and also looking at the Brattle Group. We need to look at that, and reparation is real. I went to a village in Brazil. I want you to know that what you are doing here is affecting every black man. Yeah. Every black man you are talking about. Our dignity is being shredded, yet you are the strong ones. And I went to that village and somebody nudged me. One Brazilian nudged me, saying, ask these people you are meeting with, what happened to the blacks that were dropped on the shores of this land? Mm-hmm. And we asked the question, nobody answered. Because the whole place was occupied by the blacks. But there was an ethnic group, I won't mention them again, from Europe that came there, and they exterminated everybody. And so today, they are living on that island. And that's the history. Buying made Nigerian good and right. Say, when that thing came, right now if you go to the market, there's no difference between made in Nigeria and made abroad or more foreign rice. There is no difference because they've gotten the technology right. Yeah. There are no things anymore, but it's not cheaper. Nigerian rice is not cheaper because we also have an elite capture of the farmers. The farmers captured and they quickly were able to mobilize. And now, what is happening with the rice itself is also happening with our fuel, isn't it? The fuel, they say they were exporting, they were importing. That's why we're buying it for almost 1,000 naira. And so we're hoping that once they start producing within Nigeria, we can now let it down. But has it come down? Dangote is now being given the fuel in naira, the raw in naira, and he's not transporting it anywhere. They are not taking it out and bringing it in. But for those who are still taking it out and bringing it in, they want to make sure that Nigeria will pay for it. And so we have a lot of things that we need to look at. The lack of the ideological basis that we're talking about, the primitive accumulation of wealth, which they are doing today, we need to remind ourselves that they are not going down with anything. Nothing, not one naira, not one car, not one house will you go down with. In fact, by building so many houses, you are wasting and destroying the structures. Like one old man confessed, he said he had 49 houses and so many projects undone. And the son said he doesn't want anything to do with it. So his own was like, why am I doing this? Why did I do this? My son doesn't want it. So what am I going to do with it? So what you have done, because if you have invested in humans, if you had not deprived people, other Africans, their own rights, life will be better. Let's work on transparency and accountability. It's very, very important. Transparency and accountability. We're not working on, most of us, when we get money and we look at corruption, anti-corruption issues. These are areas that we have gone to, but not many people are working on it. The quality of you. If you are here today, you are not here by accident. Continue to struggle. Be the voice of justice. Be the voice of social justice. Be the voice of sanity wherever you are. We will try our best. But the kind of current government, with the examples that they are setting, this is not the government that will save us. Rather, they are impoverishing. But because we have given them that right, we have to be able to demand from them. Somebody, I want to end by one thing that a politician told me. We were sitting somewhere and he said, Ene, people need to fight about the minister of state. It is not in the constitution. This is a lawmaker. This is somebody who had been in the Senate. You people need to fight for it. I say you are the lawmaker and you are asking civil society to fight for it. So a lot of burden has been put on on civil society. But let's network. Let's continue the networking, and recognize, let's bring back patriotism, patriotic zeals. When I was young, no Nigerian was speaking from the dustbin. But in my lifetime, Nigerians are picking from the dustbin. We're a failure of a generation. But let's keep hope alive because this country is one of the best countries in the world. Thank you.
Much. I don't feel that way because development is what we are here about. Development is what governance is all about. And we are all affected in one way or the other by whatever. Also unmindful of the level of degradation or the glass case speaker said. I'm speaking in my capacity as an individual, not for the minister or for the PAMSEC at all, not at all, but I'm speaking as an individual from the Ministry of Environment. So just to appreciate our keynote speaker, Prof, thank you so much for that. I really learned so much because you took us to the past, brought us to the present, and you also gave us an inroad into how the future should be like and opening it up for us to come up with suggestions. I want to appreciate that and to also say that as a student of development studies, I found that very interesting because a lot of things that have been swept underground, you brought them all up, and I also would appreciate that document. It's a good one for one to keep going through, to digest at every given point in time. So without having to say much, like I said earlier, the MC asked, what is the way? He said, what's the way out of debt crisis? Having given a summary of all that the keynote speaker said, he said, what's the way out of debt crisis? And for me, what came to my mind is counterpart funding. Counterpart funding is what I think my ministry enjoys from a lot of development partners, international organizations. Because for the counterpart fundings, they show your own level of commitment. They have something to give you for developmental projects, but till you show your own commitment to it, till you give a fraction of what they would give you, you're not going to have anything. So that is what we have been enjoying. But in the midst of that, there is still need for transparency and accountability because whatever comes still has to be judiciously used for the purpose of, for whatever developmental project it is. In the ministry, we enjoy some World Bank projects, World Bank, yes, finance projects that have to do with the environment, to do with climate change, to do with smart agriculture, flooding and all of that, pollution control and all of this. So just to say that if government agencies too would look into that, it's another way out of debt crisis, like the question was asked. Then I think to also say that funding of our needs and not wants is also very critical, like I think the other speaker said. What are our needs as a nation? What are our wants? Just like our own personal needs and wants, we've been told to cater, to prioritize our needs and not our wants. So if we also do that at the national level, it will help us to curtail this quest for loans at every slightest opening or opportunity. Then lastly, prioritization. There's a need for us to prioritize what matters to citizens. What is it that how should citizens feel governance? These are things that I think we on the other side should be prioritized. And then we also appreciate the civil society organizations, the non-state actors for being there, for doing what they are doing. You're bringing a balance, you're helping the government, you're helping the government to remain balanced. You're bringing check and balances to the system, and we appreciate that, and we hope that you continue with this. And I know that for climate repatriation, yes, a lot of things have happened to our environment in the course of development. So we also look forward to more of such advocacy by the civil society organizations, for international organizations also who have done so much damage to our environment, to also have a way of giving back to us to see how we can mitigate some of these effects of climate change. Thank you. Thank you. This is just a little I have to add to this. Thank you.
That was achieved in 2005. You know, by the time that was during the Obasanjo administration. Before the PSI was introduced, we were complaining about the IMF imposed policy, structural adjustment policies and programs. So because we were protesting about that, they now talked about, because we were calling it imposed. Yeah. So now they say, no, we are not going to impose. So you will develop your homegrown, economic policy. And so we went about developing that policy support instrument. But the policy support instrument is the case of the voice of Jacob and the hand of his son. So to you, in the open, it is a homegrown Nigerian policy. But what went on the ground, it is an IMF,
All of the consultants.
Exactly, they were involved in developing those documents. So we must be clear on all of those. Second point I want to talk about is the IMF loan that is being paid. The issue of debt repudiation raised by Prof. You see, I'm happy that you raised the issue of debt repudiation, because it was, if you went in Sevilla, in all of the meetings, the intergovernmental meetings, you will never hear debt cancellation. You will never hear debt repudiation. They are not issues. The only thing you will hear in those meetings is debt sustainability and debt restructuring. That's the language you will hear. So for us, civil society, we must have our own language we use in engaging governments. So our language is debt cancellation, is debt repudiation. We must get that very clear. Because when you use someone's language, you are easily sucked into the customs and traditions. Yeah? I am coming to Comrade Taiwo Akerele. That is where I'm coming from. Because I like the way you are a responsible man, very gentle man. You like to be very responsible,
And accountable.
Well, and accountable, transparent, honest. Once you borrow, pay, because that's what our father taught us.
Yes.
Just borrow and pay. But Professor raised an issue that some people came to Benin Kingdom several years ago, took away the monarch, exiled him, grabbed the economy of Benin Kingdom, stole all the artifacts, and went to their museum to hide them in different locations in Europe. And we are talking of over 100 years. We are not talking of 1 year. And each year, every day, people come to, and massively, people come. They pay money to look at all those stuff. And they made so much money. And, he was asking, where is the money? Is that transparency? Is that accountability?
Responsibility.
Or, on the part of the thief? People, they were thieves. They stole. They were stolen artifacts.
Gentleman type.
They were not, You know, so, and what language do you use for such characters? Gentleman language? No. You use the right language. You hit the nail on the head, the way it is. The other issue that Prof raised was the issue about the AU leadership. I'm happy that Diana was trying to maybe also color the AU as one institution that is, doing it right. Yes, they are talking about reparation now, not so. How was AU established? AU was an idea of late Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. He wanted a united Africa to confront all of these things we are discussing in this room. And they saw it, that the man was moving. He was coming. He was ready. He was mobilizing. He was strategizing. And the next thing they will do was to cut him off. And after they cut him off now, they now said, okay, the Africans, you can go and establish your AU. Now this bastard is gone. I've taken him away. And so the EU is the one funding the African Union. The EU, the European Union. And so all the money they will use there is the EU that is giving them the money. And so what do you want to do? They are your creditors. So this.
We tend to not to understand one point in the sense that the debt we are discussing about is big business. Debt itself is big business. And it is both for the creditors as well as the borrowers. After all, Nigeria was at the point to borrow in the 70s, 80s. We're not talking about that. Perhaps I'm saying this because I was privileged to have attended a training by the IMF and World Bank on debt borrowing. And one of the issues raised here are that, just like all the speakers has agreed earlier on that, we also have to look inward, technically, and ask ourselves that, have we judiciously used these funds for the purpose of which they are meant for? Of course, they are also watching. Most of the things we are discussing today, they taught us. Whatever the reaction we are getting is about programming. So we need to strategize and develop our own unique way of responding to debt issues. You talk about some of these antiquities and everything that, yes, it's a very good point to raise, that you've also stolen so much from us. We need reparation because you have not been able to pay us. And of course, some of this we can even offset some of the so-called debt. But the point we should critically understand is that debt itself is not only when it is even liquid. There's a political undertone to it. Of course, when you listen to IMF speak, they will tell you it's not the way you evaluate this, because they will give you not just in written, they will even give you in figures. They analyze it, and you will even be convinced within yourself that indeed you are owing this figure. We were at the point, yes. So I call it a systemic programming of the mind. So, and we have been, I don't want to use an ugly word now, we have been so down to the extent that we have followed it up to a point of where we discuss. Prof, I like what your interjection earlier that, look, we've been discussing debt from the 70s, even when we had a lot of money, even when we had a lot of resources. Let me just say money now. We were also giving it back to some African countries were taken from us there. I'm sure you agree to this, Diana. We partially based South Africa from their debt and whatever they were owing there and the other. We can always go back to that. All we need to do is to strategize. And that's why I want to commend some of the recommendations you made. And I listed them down. They will be very helpful because if you look at the team here, advancing debt relief through reparation and reparative justice, we need to address it. And I was very happy when she was telling that I was noting them and all that, because I'm a procurement expert. I know the implication of not utilizing funds for the purpose for which you are meant for. That's the first question they will ask, oh, are you running your policy, your law effectively and all that? So when he said we should strengthen our domestic governance and transparency, it's very key. We need to strengthen our governance system. And how do we do? Civil society have to also engage with our leaders. like Antini has always been maintaining. We know her. This has been it. We need to sustain it. It's not just by saying it here. Let us please put more effort in ensuring that some of these measures here, which the lead speaker spoke earlier on, that we must take it beyond here. Let them know. And let it be a responsibility on the individuals. Secondly, they talk about we must establish a credible debt audit mechanism. It's very, very important. If the government are not ready to do, we can do it as civil society. Let us create a debt audit system where we can get it. Because all that we're talking now, it's often difficult for anybody to specifically tell you that, oh, this is the amount of money we are doing. Because if you finish with IMF, you go to World Bank. If you go to World Bank, it's Paris Club. Paris clubs are even individuals that have their money that put it there. You may not know. So it's business, they're also waiting for profit.
For sure.
So by the time they sit you down and analyze it for you, see a different thing. I'm saying this because when we were querying them, they were also giving us answers back. So you need to have this one at the back of your mind. And again, now I have talked about implementing a transparent law on procurement contracts. It's extremely very, very important that we need to look at our procurement laws. What are we using all this money for? The one we stole inside and the one we stole outside. The one we borrowed. What are we using them for? So if we don't strengthen our policies, our laws, and monitor them effectively, we'll come back after 10 years again and say the same thing. So we have to take that one up. Then Diana also talked about regional advocacy and collective bargaining. It's very key that we should align with some templates that we already have. Like we talk about Kenya is existing one. Please let us know how is Kenya doing it. We need to also work with them, understand this system that we can effectively go. And then engaging with multilateral and bilateral credit. Now this is another area I want us to take note of. When you discuss without having their feedback or without them, if you just send your recommendation to them, I'm quoting one of the IMF representatives there. He said, look, you go to your hall, you discuss, we were not there, you take your decision and send to us. So we'll go back to our experts, policy makers, and then ask them to review what they have sent to us. So, but it is often better that if you interrogate with us physically. So I want to recommend that in our subsequent engagement, let's see if we can get an IMF personnel representative to be here. Let's hear from them, because they also have some issues to raise that we don't know. One thing they have always been saying, which all of us have said, was that we do not utilize the fund that we get, the loans that we get, rightly. In essence, corruption is taking a lot of it. Yeah. So it is very important we have to take that one. Then finally, I want to also add one thing. I think the Prof, you spoke about it, but you didn't quite elaborate more. But I think I need to help and also support it with some laws. And that is to say that we need to encourage our local content development. You recall recently, the president just launched what they call Nigeria First policy. Many of us are not working. I am working around that, and a lot is happening. So what we are trying to do is to educate or even support government to be able to implement it well, because they just said they don't even know how to implement it. You can quote me for this, because we are waiting to that document and document to the government on this, and they will call us again and say, oh, what do you mean by this? So we need to engage with government on this. This Nigerian First policy will help you and I, everybody, to be able to appreciate what we have and pay less. And stay less for homelessness. So that takes me to the last point where our moderator, Leo, was asking whether can we do without debt. I don't know whether to say yes or no. Yes, because in the future, maybe 10 years ago, we can be talking about running our economy without debt. But now, in the situation we find ourselves, I don't think we can say so. Because we're already indebted, quote and unquote, that even some of these figures we don't know how much they are, where are they, and all that. But it is important for us to know that we can work towards a debt-free nation. Let us have at the back of our mind that we can achieve that. And the only way we can achieve that is to put some of those sensitivity in order as a human. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Prof was quite philosophical in his approach when it comes to the political economy of on debt relief. So, Prof, thank you so much. My intervention will be incomplete if I do not also acknowledge the other panelists, because some of their contributions actually would inform my question and possibly comment. Madam Ene, as usual, has given us some practical insights. Likewise, the gentleman debt sustainable pusher, Mr. Taiwo. And then, of course, our more radically active sister from Kenya. Thank you so much, and of course, other members of the panel. Looking at the theme, advancing debt relief through reparations and reparative justice, it would appear that Leo's intervention, as well as Mohammed's intervention, seems to focus on reparations. And then the debate on reparation, from what I have gathered from this conference, is between debt sustainability and relief, as well as debt repudiation and cancellation. Now, whereas it would seem that Taiwo and Muhammad seems to be gentlemen. If you have an agreement, then pacta sunt servanda. You need to, the agreement is binding. So what did you agree to take this debt for, and how have you utilized it before you start asking for repudiation? Sound argument, and somehow embedded in logic as well. But then the other parties as well, their position is equally instructive, in the sense that if you take into account the injustice, the enslavement, the deprivation, would you still want to go the route of a gentleman? Do you understand? So, wouldn't repudiation be a just approach? All right? Because there's something in law. We talk about changing circumstances. And that, in the first instance, was what informed the new international economic order. So, when you look at the circumstances of how we came to be where we are, then you may justify, the argument of those calling for outright cancellation and repudiation of our debt. Now, that's so much about the issue of reparations. So I'm going to focus a little more on reparative justice. Now, in focusing on reparative justice, I'll tell you a little story. I grew up in Surulere area. I had a neighbor who was a wealthy trader, lace material. And she's always traveling abroad. She'd go to Switzerland, give them a design to make the Swiss lace, and then she'd come back and sell. And sometime I approached her. I said, Mommy, why don't you invite your partners in Switzerland to come and invest in Nigeria? And she said to me, she thought about it, and she discussed the possibility with her banker. And what did they do? They said, let's take a trip around Lagos. For those of you who are familiar with Eric Moore, Orile Gomu, and Ladipo, Eric Moore, Orile Gomu was an industrial hub. You had Tate and Lie, you had so many Bako bags, so many. And then they took her around. Lo and behold, they had all shut down. And some of their warehouses were occupied by churches. Same thing with Ladipo. And it became a problem. And I started thinking about that. For some time now, since about 2014, I've been eating locally produced rice in my house. And that was also strengthened by my daughter. She would not hear of you buying foreign rice. She would insist on the Nigerian rice. When we go to the supermarket, she goes around looking for the made in Nigeria's shelves.
She picked the item made in Nigeria. There's a particular chocolate she loves, and it's made here in Nigeria. She prefers it. And that takes me to a point that was made by Taiwo. When Taiwo said, Nigeria can actually fund what we need and not our wants. To a large extent, that is very true. I'll come back to that point. After telling you, I was challenged. It was at a gathering like this in India some years back. Precisely, Ahmedabad, where that incident happened in Gujarat. The Indian man said to me, if you can find anything not produced in India in this room, I'm going to give you $100. And then we went on looking for what was not produced in India. Everything in that room was produced in India. Now, if we were to do the same here, show us what was produced in Nigeria. I doubt local content. Yeah, you know, it underscores a very key principle on the issue of reparative justice. Now, we couldn't find any. But there was something, going back to what I said, there was something that was key about what they had. They were not sophisticated, but they were functional. So, what is important about our needs, we can be functional. For as long as it's functional. And when we talk about Ajaokuta, the question is, in the era of terracotta, in the era of knock, what was the technology our forebears used? So did they have to wait for the Russians to come? But they were producing those things. So that means we have the capacity, mentally. We can do so many things within. And that is one of the key points, very brilliant point that Taiwo made about the unfair trade practice. You see, when Donald Trump announced the tariff, I was happy he did, because as a lawyer, I've been looking for a way out. You know, before you have any agreement Nigeria had signed, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, Nigeria quickly signed. The World Trade Organization, Nigeria quickly signed. And we boxed ourselves into a corner. Getting out of those agreements became a problem. But this is an opportunity for us. And so I was happy that the president said Nigeria first. Of course, I'm glad that you have identified that it is not being implemented. Why? Because we lack the infrastructure backbone. And that's the conducive environment they will keep telling us about. Truth be told, can you do anything without electricity? No. Now, and that takes me back again to what Prof said. When Prof said something about the false national consciousness of Nigerians. Number one, it's not necessarily our fault, but then again, it's partly our fault because we need to make the sacrifices. Because to get a very good example, you know, I'm sorry to say this, but in church recently somebody was saying that the Japanese, while studying in America, they were using Japanese pencil. And each time they have to sharpen it always because it was not good enough. And then they asked a question, why don't you just pick up the pencil made in America, which is more enduring? And said, no, that if we use yours, who is going to use our own until they perfected the technology? Again, if you take a look at, you know, before, Japanese product wasn't anything comparable to German products. It was German for electronics. Sooner or later, the Japanese took over. Now, after a while, the Taiwanese product, now you don't say made in Taiwan. Taiwanese products have gained recognition and acceptability. Then we went on China. China has gained reputation. Korea, it's gradual. We talk about urban-made products. Lo and behold, gentlemen and ladies, my father retired a custom officer. There were occasions in the 80s, the shoes made in Aba were so enduring. They were of good quality. So what happened? Even till now? You see, so what happened? So we can actually make Nigeria first and change the paradigm. You know, because until we'll do that, that is the reparative justice that I am concerned about. I'm not focusing on your debate on cancellation and gentleman relief, but on this fair trade practice, so that we can, do you know, some time ago in Germany, I bought a chocolate for 30 euros. The same chocolate I bought for 30 euros, if you convert that money to Naira, you buy a bag or tons of cocoa. Meanwhile, we export our raw materials. And that's one of the problems we have. So, my suggestion is there a way, in focusing on reparative justice, that we clamor for value addition on our raw materials, rather than, because if you take a look at it, almost all the raw materials required for industries by the global north is found in Africa. And so if part of our discussion is that African should insist, as part of our advocacy, that we are going to do what? We are not exporting raw materials anymore. But this should be part of what we take to the table when we go to negotiate general trade agreements, not the raw material. If we continue to do that, we're shortchanging ourselves and we're exporting all our jobs. That's been part of the problems that we have. But we need our government to be alive and responsible in terms of the infrastructure backbone. It is very important. I recall training some people in Aba years back, and I made a point and I wrote a report and said there's a need for small power projects. I'm happy that that is being implemented. Do you understand? And so we need that infrastructure backbone to encourage. There's nothing we cannot do. All the industries were here before. People have talked about that. So the kind of reparative justice is, we want a situation where we can negotiate and say, look, we're no longer selling our raw materials. Look at what is.
First, I was with Felix about a fortnight ago. I'm happy he didn't discuss this paper with me. But I am happy with the historical, analytical approach that Felix and many of the panelists adopted in discussing this issue. Now, the challenge with discussing this issue is that we think it's an isolated, peculiar African problem. The debt mode there is an international system. And it just doesn't affect Africa. It also affects the international community. So, I can give you a contemporary example so that we don't go too far. The United States Congress had just passed the big, beautiful bill. One of the fundamental implications of that bill is that it add between $1 and $3 trillion to the American debt. Our own mother country, Britain, just tried to pass a budget. I mean, it cost a bill in the House of Commons, where the majority of members of the Labour Party rebelled. And what was the problem? Trying to cut down the needs that the state meets to the vulnerable people in society. Whereas the Labour Party was set up as a socialist organization to meet the ordinary people, the needs of the ordinary people. So we have had to deal with this neoliberal framework, not only by the global north, also by the global south. And so the arguments at the international level, when we talk about Milton Friedman, Frederick Hayek, and all the people in the Chicago School, is the attempt to roll back the state from intervention in the economy, social life, and so on and so forth. But I guess these are big issues that are not related to debt immediately. What is important is that we contract debts because of insufficiency of domestic resources for development finance. In Nigeria, in our history, because it's important to also remember history, in our history, we borrowed money during colonial days to extend the railway from Bauchi to Lagos. And that railway would take the tin mining jobs for export, and of course bring goods back, imported goods back to create new cities and so on and so forth. We borrowed money to establish the Kanji Dam, because somebody referenced the Kanji Dam. The Kanji Dam project in 1962, we borrowed money to establish it. We borrowed money to invest in the first Port Harcourt refinery. But these investments are what in economics we call capital generative borrowing. They could generate income to service the debts and eventually to pay back the loan itself. Unfortunately, we have abandoned that. We have abandoned that model. There is a problem, and many people have talked about that. There's a problem, an internal problem to us. We seem to have lacked the capacity now to qualitatively negotiate debts or even to structure those debts. We have lost our capacity. We listen to outsiders, what they tell us, and we take it up. The second issue I want to talk about is the IMF and World Bank that we'll talk about here. The IMF and World Bank were created as colonial institutions. They were created post-1945. The World Bank was to aid the reconstruction. Actually, it was called the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And the IMF was to assist countries which have problems with balance of payments. You come there, they give you some money, then you can use it to import goods and whatever you need in your country. So when we use the IMF and World Bank framework, we are disengaged from the core issues that should bother us in relation to development finance. The IMF and World Bank today are there as proxies for Western capital. They go there to guide you to ensure that whatever you borrow, you pay back. They probably practically don't do much for you now. They are no IMF is not investing in development. Well, we still go there to go and collect balance of payment support. But World Bank is not investing in development. Not even those studies the World Bank funded to talk about uneven development in Nigeria and so on and so forth. So that those are issues that we need to recognize that both IMF and World Bank, they have seats, they have desks at the Central Bank of Nigeria. They have it in your ministry, they have it in the Ministry of Finance, they have it in the Ministry of Budget and Planning. So whatever you discuss it with them before you take it into your national policy and so on and so forth. But they are doing that to protect the interest of international capital. They're not doing it for any other reason. They are protecting international capital. Now, Nigerian officials, African officials collaborate with these institutions and insinuate Africa into the debt peonage. Now, somebody asked, is there any way out of debt crisis? I think there is. We have discussed reputation, we have discussed stop borrowing and all of that. But we can pay back our loans and do development. We can mobilize domestic resources to do development. The last thing I want to say is also practical issue about Ajabuta. We also forget the history of Ajabuta. After the Civil War, the Nigerian government approached the United States of America to help it develop the steel industry. US refused. They approached the Germans. The Germans refused. It was only the Soviet Union that was willing to develop the Ajabuta project for us. And of course, the terms were a lot more liberal than what we would have got from Western countries. But Nigerian officials sabotaged that process. In 1981, a delegation of Nigerian officials, I can mention names now, Parunogo, Mama Ali Makele, Minister of Steel Development, they went to the Soviet Union to go and discuss the steel project. And stories came. There was story published in the newspaper, the Tribune newspaper, the sketch and all of that. And they collected money. And when the crisis broke out in Nigeria, Parunogo resigned as minister. We tend to forget it because we are dealing with history, sir. That's the history of our country. And so, Obasanjo, because you talked about Obasanjo, I'm sorry, I don't hide you. I don't hurt you. Obasanjo privatized Ajabuta and sold it to Mittal. Mittal went to Ajabuta and stripped the place. Took away the spare parts and all of that. Then he tried to remove the furnace from Ajabuta. And the Ajabuta people rose up and blocked the road and said, you won't enter this place. Mittal left Nigeria. When Mittal left Nigeria, what more? He went to international arbitration and was awarded a lot of millions of dollars which Nigeria had to pay back to settle Mittal. So if we want to develop our own country, we have the capacity to develop. Of course, we have the resources to develop that, but we need to have a deeper commitment to development of our own country. And so to conclude this, I want to thank you and I want to thank Aneej for the opportunity you have presented for us.
When I take this loan, I'm going to reduce it from inside. We should not be ungentleman about it.
But lastly, I don't want to waste so much time. Our debt is not individual debt, and so we have agreed that it's a national debt, and we have given sovereignty to our government. So the question would be, if we are going to solve this problem, we must be able to solve our governance issue. As we speak, none of the political parties, because the constitution is very clear, it is the only vehicle to get governance going is through political parties. None of the political parties is talking about this. None of the individuals that are clamoring to lead us today are talking about this. None of them is a leftist. What I mean? You have been a leftist and we know that you have leftist tendencies. If we make you president today, we know where you stand on issues around debt. Prof, we know where you stand. Comrade, you are a capitalist somehow, and we know where you stand. Yes, Mr. Comrade, I like that. Me too. I am more of a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, in the middle. That's what I am. Yes. But the problem we have today is that we have capitalists masquerading as leftists. They are gathering today to say that they want to lead us, and they're not telling us what they want to do. How are you going to do it? And we've not asked that question. And unless we get our politics right, we will not get our governance right. Finally, no third world country has ever developed using democratic principles. Go and look at it everywhere. China has shown clearly that the form of democracy we're practicing does not guarantee you development. You must find a way. Cuba did it. Cuba started exporting doctors. Not because their doctors don't want to jackpot and leave Cuba, but because the government at that time was not democratic and said you cannot leave. Nigeria has the cheapest medical schools in the world. We train our doctors at the cheapest rates. And they export and they go and they become big doctors. We need to begin to think of how do we keep our professionals back for us to develop our nation. And I like how my lecturer ended it. We must begin to look inward. And the only way we can look inward is if we can start changing our democratic, practices to suit what belongs to us, what makes us great. I think we can do it if we want to. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Citizens and the receivers bring a narrow to the intimate relationship between the arms of government. In the terms that we have the legislative, we have the executives, and then we have the judiciary. Now, when the president went to the Senate, there was this type of relationship that we understand that is not supposed to be. It's not a professional relationship where the Senate are even singing songs to jubilate and to show their their support for him. So I can remember the last time when Buhari tried to borrow money. A time like that, he wanted to borrow 22 point something billion, and the Senate disagreed. But I'm not sure a type of disagreement can come in this era we are. So as a citizen, I want to know how can we bring a narrow to the intimate relationship between the arms of government. And secondly, for the product of Nigeria to be patronized, the government also has to do a lot to it. If we look at our government now, the type of cars they are driving, most of them, every one of them are not Nigerian-made cars. And if we look at even the manufacturers of cars in Nigeria, it's not for the poor at all. If we go to Innocent Motors, I'm not sure I can afford that as an ordinary person. So how can we bring a change to this that is going to be what? A lifelong, and it's going to affect the debt, borrowing and everything. So thank you very much.
Particularly, right now there is this African Leadership Magazine summit going on in London. And our leaders from various parts of Africa have gone to converge in London to celebrate their achievement and to receive awards. I know some of them unofficially will end up collecting more loans. Now, there are a lot of things that are going in the governance cycle that we don't know, and sometimes they come and tell us that we got either aid or we got a grant for development purposes. And at the end of the day, we end up with debts or more debts on our heads. Currently talking about the Nigerian contents and how the debt affects us. I think while we're trying to celebrate the effort of government, particularly the lawyer colleague was talking about how his daughter preferred Nigerian made rice. Today, Nigerian farmers are lamenting. Some days back, pride or some kind of attention was given to agriculture. As of today, myself, I'm also a victim because I also enter into farming. Last year and this year, the opening of the borders have crushed food prices in the open markets. Investments in farming, farmers are ending up at a loss. You can go to only premium locations to get food at premium prices. But the farmers out there are right now crying. Now, in as much as, yes, the poor man there may be getting food at a cheaper rate, but farming as an enterprise is going to suffer because nobody that will sink heavy money in it will want to continue to end up at a loss. Now, back to our debt issues. While we will not be able to foresee just the way it has happened from the presentation of various speakers, what was initially given to us as grants or as aid, we have paid more than 3 times in multiples. I think it is not out of place for us to come out and engage both the IMF and the World Bank, just the way some people have suggested, even in this discussion, that now the debt crisis most African countries are going into by reason of their insincere representation, because they will always tell us that we are not yet in a debt crisis. But the figures are quite humongous, they are quite scary. And it doesn't look as if we go at the rate we are going, it will get any better any soon. That they become part of these discussions. And we are talking about reparations now, because we also suffered a wrong. Not because we took the loan, but because they first wronged us. We may not have seen it before now, but personally, I remember 10 years ago, I had to pay in Italy, in Turin particularly, to enter the Egyptian museum. Things that were taken from Africa. They are there, and we are paying in order to see them. They are making a lot of money out of it. So the reparation and the reparative justice approach is a viable tool for us to use in order to get the debt relief that our countries need. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Who have that sensibility, conviction to lead well? You know, before Ambassador signed that Paris law, the civil society did so much, yet he just ignored us. He didn't listen to anybody. He went ahead and do what he wanted to do because it's a neoliberal fixated government. And we have no way now to change the narrative of who becomes our leader. The people who are gathering up to, they are like Obasanjo, they are like Tinubu, no difference. So the answer would have been, let me say it openly, is a people-led, workers-backed, peasants, what do you call them, civil society people, progressive intellectuals who fight for a socialist Nigeria. Even if you don't use the word socialist, let's even leave that word. But let me say a nationalist-looking Nigeria. Yes, if you don't want that. So until we are able to get that kind of government, all these things we are saying, those who are in government are their allies. They are their agents here. So we need to change the government. We need to change the ideology before we can get through. Thank you.
Thank you.
Policies. Even up to this moment, if you live in the UK, you know, all the citizens and all of that, those who are not working get allowances.
Yes.
Children are protected. You live in a house, and they tell us to withdraw all our social, we should bring down the budget on our social amenities. Since we came in here this morning, many women have died on the maternity death road. And so for me as a woman, that's why some people say you don't laugh when you are speaking and all of that. See, there's nothing to smile about. I'm lucky to be here. I'm the few that are privileged to be here. My sisters are dying, or some of them are sitting even in the hospital now. They have been released from the hospital. They have given birth. They cannot go home. But so they are protecting their citizens. And that's why the issue of welfare is very key. Social protection. What are we using our money for? And then, you just look at the artifacts that we're talking about. Somebody told Professor Harry Haye, who used to be, he was a minister and also professor at the University of Jos. He said there is a place you go, I think it's in California. You go to a village, it's like they came to thief land and took all their artifacts. A whole village, and where people go to. I've forgotten, I have one of his books that identify what he copied from there and what you see. So there is a lot of artifacts from Nigeria that are still hidden somewhere, and I think that's a way forward for us to look at. Debt audit is something that we need to. We started the debt audit, but we also slowed down when we came back, to fight the audit of the kind of debt. Debt we're talking about. There is a lot of borrowing domestically that is going on within the state governments that are impoverishing the banks. So debt audit at the local level is very, very important, both at the state level and local government. It's very important for us to take it to that level. What is bringing them down? We need to name and shame the borrowers, like what we talked about. Who borrowed? What did you borrow for? You must be accounted for it. We are talking of Ken Saro-Wiwa and others, blessed memory. Fortunately, well, I don't know whether to say fortunately or unfortunately. I met him a few months before he was killed. And that is, I bought all the remaining of his books, everything I bought. The one that was left, we met at the conference here in Transcorp. And all of that. Today you can say you forgive them. What of those who have committed crime against humanity? What of Ibrahim Babangida, General Babangida, that said he had no June 12th election? Some of us as activists, we know what we went through during the June 12th. And he's still walking free. No sanctions. And he's being celebrated. And so what we are talking about, unless we bring sanctions, we need to be able to look at that. We talk of the fair trade, EPA, that's the Economic Partnership Agreement. All they said is for you to engage in this, prepare your house. But Nigerian government will not commit money into it. They had EU consultants that are paid by the EU, sitting to discuss on your behalf. Where are we from here? But I will say that we should not give up. Pan-Africanism is where we need to move. We need to look at ourselves as Africans, the kind that you have Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Mwalimu Nyerere, all of them, and then Jomo Kenyatta, and all of those Africans. Let's rebuild ourselves and reconnect ourselves to the spirit of our ancestors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
The IMF, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, IFC, AFC, AFDB, they are in business. If you want grants, if you want humanitarian intervention, you go to MacArthur Foundation, you go to Ford Foundation, you go to all of those things. The EU, they will give you money for free. But if you want loan, you go to IMF, you go to the World Bank. So there are conditions guiding debt and debt restructuring. So we must not bring emotions to it. That's number one. Number two, when we're talking of slavery and colonialism, we must, just like Abiola did. Abiola was the chairman of the African OAU Committee on Reparation to Africa. So it's a separate issue entirely. You cannot mingle business with slavery and colonialism. It should not be. We should address the issue of colonial punishment that was meted on Africa. We should address it head on. We should also address the issue of slavery head on. But if we are going to IMF to go and collect money to build dam, to build school, he says, we must go to them for business. And when it is time to pay, we pay. If you go and use your money to buy a vehicle that will convey your president, convey your senate president, you are now coming back to the table for negotiation. Nobody's going to listen to you. That's why when we attend all these international conferences that tends to discuss issue of debt, they just listen to us, but nothing comes out of it in the end, because they know that they're just joking with us. That's number one. Number two, all debt should be linked to verifiable and productive projects. Oh, that would be number three. When we are going for debt, somebody mentioned the issue of Kainji Dam. Somebody mentioned, so many other projects that we have used money, Ajaokuta. Those are verifiable projects that if Ajaokuta was working today, we will have been we will have been making profit as a country, but we will have finished paying since. But of course, in our usual way, it was mismanaged. And now the issues are still there. So we should invest our loan on verifiable projects that at the end of the day, we end up repaying itself in the end. Then, finally, institutional strengthening. We must support the FCC to do the job, to do their work. The FCC, the ICPC, and all the institutions of government, FRRS, all of them. If we don't support to do their job, those who are looting the money that we have gone to borrow will go scot-free. They will come here, they will not be blaming ourselves that our country is not doing it. So we must support the FCC, we must strengthen their capacity to deliver. We must strengthen their capacity to prosecute corrupt officials and those who collaborate with our oppressors to continue to put us in the debt conundrum. But of course, we must also reward those who have done well for this country, while looking out for those who are not doing well in terms of corruption. We must also identify those islands of excellence, those who are standing upright in the ministries of finance, ministry of budget, and say, no, Nigeria must go this way, we must follow our plan. We must also reward them. On that note, I thank you for listening. God bless.
Thank you very much.
All the participants for coming for this meeting, for your thoughts, and also for your comments. They're very thought-provoking. And thank you for welcoming us to Nigeria. It's my first time in Nigeria, and I'm sure also for my we have received a very warm welcome. It's very good to be here. We, as Kenyans, we really love Nigerian culture. We love your music. We love your movies. Nollywood to the world, something that Nigerians should be very proud of. So it's a privilege to be here. So I just want to start with the IMF comment, because as Afrodad, we do engage the IMF and the World Bank, and we are privileged, just as Taiwo, to participate in the Civil Society Policy Forum. And one of the things you need to note is they are very good at inviting you. They are very good at public relations. The question comes at implementing the recommendations that civil society and even member states gives to them. And so what I would recommend is we need to track some of these recommendations and actions that we give to the IMF and the World Bank. And when we meet them, we need to ask them, we met with you last year, or we met with you last month. How many of those recommendations have you taken up? Of course, they can't take up all the recommendations because it's not realistic, but there are those recommendations that are doable. For example, we've been is the aspect of capacity to negotiate. Let's remember, we are not on equal footing when we're negotiating. Remember, the system is creditor-centric. It's favoring the creditor. There's no way Africa is on an equal playing field. So we cannot say we don't have the capacity. We do have the capacity, but the playing field is not equal. And that is why we are calling for a reform of how the system is done. And one of those reforms is also governance reforms of the IMF and the World Bank, because the banks themselves are not working. So it's also an issue of governance within the whole system and how it's operating. Also, let's not lose hope. Let's look at Kenya and how the young people are rising up in terms of governance. We're just talking about governance. The young people are on the streets in Kenya almost every week demonstrating because of poor governance, because of corruption, because of access to services. They're not able to access education. They're not able to get medicine in hospital. Madam Ene has pointed that out. They're not able to even afford food, basic food they're not able to afford. The young people are on the streets because of that. So there is hope in Africa that young people are rising up. And even we are seeing Burkina Faso, fantastic example of what President Ibrahim Traore is doing in Burkina Faso. Africa is rising up. The African voices cannot be ignored. So we are not hopeless. Let's not talk as if we are hopeless. We are actually very hopeful, seeing the examples from Kenya, the Kenyan youth, seeing the examples from Burkina Faso, being cited as an example. They've kicked out France. They're actually rising up as a country. So there is hope. We are not without hope. So let's remember that.
They've dealt with it from different perspectives, alternate snapshots, we have seen of this issue. And so we're not going to let this issue lie low here. We are going to continue this conversation, even bigger forums. And so next month we are heading to Accra for the AFCON 5. We are also going to, this will be a major conversation in Accra. So we are going there with our own resolutions here. Our team, they are putting together, so we are going to share the outcome of this conversation to everyone so that we look at it. Whatever was not discussed today, please use the mark it right so that we can take it off. But all of those that we discussed today and agreed, please let it be there in that document that will be taken to Accra. I would like to also thank our esteemed participants. You guys have been wonderful. I saw everybody grab the microphone to say something, and your inputs were quite incisive, quite encouraging. So it's like we're all on the same table on this matter. So, but we need to take it out there. We need to confront the government. You see, Diana, when you talk about parliament participation, we actually extended invitation to the Senate Committee Chair on Local and Foreign Debts. We also invited the House Committee Chair on Local and Foreign Debts. And we did not just send letters, we followed up with visits. Our colleagues here, they went to the National Assembly, we met with all kinds of officials there. We are also at the Debt Management Office. We lodged letter there, we expected them to be here. In fact, this is the very first time we'll be organizing the National Debt Meeting. We don't have the Debt Management Office participating. So it is really strange their absence here today. But we really need to find out because we need to continue to engage them. Because the parliament are supposed to be the representatives of the people, but maybe because of the way they emerged, so they really feel disconnected. They are not really connected to the people. So when they see a letter from you, if you write to President Trump today, I'm sure that in 48 hours you'll get a response. But just write to your own representative, the Senate or National Assembly, or even your local government chairman. Even in 1 month, they may not respond to your mail. That's the way Nigeria works. Or that is the way Nigeria is not working. So, mine is to say a big thank you to all of you and our technical team that have been doing some excellent work on the background. Even as we're talking here, my colleague and friend in Uganda, Patrick, he's been watching all what we've been doing. He's been snapping photos of what you guys were saying and sending to me, So there's that massive online participation, but surprisingly, we are not able to connect to those who were online. So, but in any case, I think the feedback that we are getting was that the conversation here was very rich, and we are going to parcel them, and then we'll share to all of you that were here. But my task, my appeal, my prayer is that let us not leave this room without doing something, each and every one of us. Let us not leave this room without doing something around these resolutions or recommendations and commitments that we are suggesting. Because change begins with me.